This isn't exciting. That's the point. So take the pressure off, relax, and let these old stories guide you gently towards sleep. We'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment if you'd like to share. Some emperors left their mark on history through grand conquests or architectural marvels. But Elagabalus? He opted for the time-honored tradition of throwing the kind of party that would make even the most hardened frat boy blush. Meet the Roman emperor who, in just 4 short years from 218 to 222 AD, managed to nearly bankrupt the empire with his penchant for extravagance. Elagabalus wasn't your run-of-the-mill emperor. He was a teenager when he took the throne, and like most teens, he had a flair for the dramatic and a curious disregard for financial consequences. But let's set the stage here. The Roman Empire was no mum-and-pop operation. It spanned 3 continents, covering parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa, and had a population of around 70 million people. Running this colossal operation was anything but cheap, yet Elagabalus treated the imperial treasury like his personal piggy bank, all for the sake of a good time. Now, when we talk about Elagabalus's parties, we're not just referring to some lavish dinners with a few senators. No, we're talking about events that would make modern-day music festivals look like a quiet night in. The pièce de résistance of his party antics was undoubtedly the infamous rose-petal prank. According to the historian Cassius Dio, Elagabalus once dumped so many rose petals on his unsuspecting guests that some of them actually suffocated. Yes, you heard that right, death by flower power. Think of it as the ancient world's version of death by chocolate, but with way more petals and far less deliciousness. But before we paint Elagabalus as merely the ultimate ancient party animal, let's dig a little deeper. Some argue that he was just a misunderstood teen who inherited a role far too great for his years. After all, he was thrust into power at the tender age of 14, a time when most of us were still grappling with algebra and awkward school dances. It's not hard to imagine why he might have been a little overwhelmed and perhaps sought solace in the familiar chaos of a good party. And then there's the cultural clash. Born in Emesa, a city in modern-day Syria, Elagabalus brought with him the worship of a sun god called Elagabal, from whom he took his name. This was a bit like trying to introduce a new pop star to a crowd of die-hard fans of classical music. It didn't go over well with the Roman traditionalists. His insistence on promoting his deity's worship over the revered Roman pantheon caused a significant amount of pearl-clutching among the senatorial class. Yet, despite the horror stories and scandalous tales, some historians suggest that the accounts of his excesses were exaggerated by those who disliked him. It's worth noting that much of what we know about Elagabalus comes from sources written after his death, when it was politically expedient to smear his reputation. After all, history's written by the victors, and in this case, by those who survived the reign of a notoriously unpopular emperor. Still, Elagabalus's reign was an economic disaster. His lavish spending drained the imperial coffers, and his focus on personal pleasure over statecraft didn't exactly bode well for the empire's stability. He spent vast sums on luxurious clothing, jewelry, and exotic animals, all while the empire was under pressure both economically and militarily. It's said that he even offered vast rewards to anyone who could invent a new type of luxury or indulgence. Talk about a gold star incentive program. In the end, Elagabalus's reign came to a predictably abrupt end. At the ripe old age of 18, he was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. They had finally had enough of his antics, and perhaps they were out of rose petals. His body was unceremoniously dumped into the Tiber, a grim reminder that even emperors had a shelf life when they pushed the boundaries of excess and decorum. So, was Elagabalus the ancient world's ultimate party animal, or just a kid in over his head? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. His tale serves as a cautionary reminder of the fine line between extravagance and recklessness, of the perils of power without maturity. But one thing's for sure, when it comes to throwing a party, Elagabalus set a standard that's hard to beat, even 2 millennia later. Now, if Elagabalus's reign was the ancient equivalent of a high-octane reality show, then the tale of Cleopatra's sister, Arsinoe IV, was more of a political thriller, with enough double-crossing and family drama to make the Lannisters look like the Brady Bunch. Our spotlight shifts from the rose-petal-strewn chaos of Rome to the sun-drenched sands of Egypt, where sibling rivalry was less about who had the better hair and more about who could outmaneuver the other in the ruthless Game of Thrones. Arsinoe IV, Cleopatra's younger sister, is often relegated to a mere footnote in the grand epic of her sibling's life. But don't let the lack of limelight fool you. Her story is a historical roller coaster of ambition, exile, and a rather mysterious end. Born around 68 BC, Arsinoe was thrust into a world where family ties were as fragile as papyrus scrolls. Her father, Ptolemy VII, was the king of Egypt, a kingdom that had seen better days, to put it mildly. The Ptolemaic dynasty was more dysfunctional than a reality TV family reunion, with rulers more concerned with palace intrigue than effective governance. When Ptolemy VII died in 51 BC, Cleopatra and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII ascended to the throne as co-rulers. Talk about an awkward job share. Arsinoe, meanwhile, found herself caught in the crossfire of power struggles that were less about sibling love and more about survival. Cleopatra, ever the political whiz, quickly realized that sharing power with a teenage brother wasn't exactly a recipe for peace and prosperity. Enter Julius Caesar, Rome's most eligible bachelor with a penchant for getting involved in Egyptian affairs. The sands of time tell us that Cleopatra won Caesar's favour, both politically and personally, leading to a showdown with Ptolemy XIII at the Battle of the Nile in 47 BC. Arsinoe, who had been aligning herself with her brother against Cleopatra, suddenly found herself on the losing side of history. But rather than concede defeat, she staged a daring escape. Picture this, the young Arsinoe fleeing Alexandria, narrowly avoiding capture by Roman forces and rallying Egyptian troops to her cause. She was nothing if not resourceful. After a brief stint as a self-proclaimed Queen of Egypt, Arsinoe's rebellion was quashed, and she was captured by Roman forces. Cleopatra, perhaps channeling her inner Machiavelli, knew that having a captive sister could be both a boon and a burden. Arsinoe was paraded through Rome in Caesar's triumph, a spectacle that was part victory lap, part humiliation ritual. Now, a lesser sibling might have faded into obscurity at this point, but Arsinoe was nothing if not resilient. Exiled to the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, Arsinoe's story takes on a mysterious twist. The temple, a sprawling sanctuary dedicated to the goddess of the hunt, was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was here that Arsinoe lived under the watchful eye of Roman guards, a captive queen in all but name. But the politics of the ancient world were as unforgiving as the desert sun, and Arsinoe's presence was a thorn in Cleopatra's side. In 41 BC, amid the political machinations following Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra allegedly persuaded her lover, Mark Antony, to have Arsinoe executed within the temple grounds. Talk about sibling rivalry reaching a whole new level of cutthroat. Arsinoe's death, shrouded in the mists of history, serves as a stark reminder of the brutal realities of power in the ancient world. Her story, overshadowed by Cleopatra's more famous exploits, is a poignant testament to the dangers of family feuds in a world where alliances shifted as quickly as the desert winds. The Ptolemaic dynasty, with its intricate web of relationships and rivalries, was a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest threats came from within one's own family. As we delve deeper into the annals of history, it's clear that Arsinoe's tale is more than just a sidebar to Cleopatra's headline act. It's a narrative of survival, ambition, and the high-stakes chess game that was ancient politics. Her life, though cut short, was a vivid illustration of the precarious nature of power in a world where the line between victor and victim was razor-thin. In a realm where thrones were less about who wore the crown and more about who could keep it, Arsinoe's story is a thrilling chapter in the saga of a dynasty that played the Game of Thrones long before it was cool. Now, as we shift our gaze from the sun-drenched sands of Egypt to the olive groves of ancient Greece, prepare to have those idealistic visions of the first Olympic Games unceremoniously shattered. While it's tempting to picture these games as noble contests of athletic prowess and honour, the reality was more akin to a competitive free-for-all where politics, cheating, and even a touch of homicide were par for the course. The Olympic Games were first held in 776 BC at Olympia, a sanctuary site dedicated to Zeus. And let me tell you, these games were less about the spirit of sportsmanship and more about who could outmaneuver whom, both on the field and off. Forget about prize money or gold medals. Winners took home wreaths made of olive leaves. But the real prize? bragging rights and, more importantly, political leverage. For city-states like Athens and Sparta, athletic glory was just another arena to flex their muscles and score points in the endless game of Greek politics. Let's dive into the juicy bits. Cheating was so common that they had a whole system for dealing with it. Athletes caught bending the rules were fined, and the money was used to erect statues of Zeus, known as Zanus, lining the path to the stadium as a public shaming tactic. Imagine that, in the ultimate twist of irony, divine homage funded by human folly. These zanes served as a constant reminder of the price of dishonesty, literally casting a shadow over future competitors. So next time you hear someone claiming sports today are riddled with scandals, just remind them that ancient athletes were setting world records in deception long before doping scandals hit the headlines. But hold on, the drama wasn't confined to mere cheating. The games often coincided with political events, and sometimes tensions boiled over into outright violence. Take the case of Cylon, an Athenian noble who attempted a coup during the Olympic festival of 632 BC. He figured the games would be the perfect distraction while he seized power back home. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for him. Failed coups and botched power grabs were just as much a part of the Olympic tradition as the discus throw. And what about murder, you ask? Well, let's talk about the pancration, a no-holds-barred event combining boxing and wrestling. It was as close to gladiatorial combat as the Greeks got, and fatalities were not unheard of. The story of Aricion of Phegalia is a classic example. Competing in 564 BC, he found himself in a chokehold on the verge of blacking out. But in a final, desperate move, he managed to break his opponent's toe, forcing a surrender. Aricion's lifeless body was declared the victor, a posthumous win that makes modern sports injuries look like paper cuts. Now, why were the Greeks so obsessed with these games, despite, or perhaps because of their darker aspects? The answer lies in the way they linked athletic triumph to personal and city-state honor. Victorious athletes were celebrated like rock stars, their achievements immortalized in poetry and statuary. Statues of winners were erected at Olympia, a far cry from today's fleeting fame. These figures stood the test of time, quite literally, as enduring symbols of athletic and civic pride. But here's the kicker. The games weren't just for the Greeks. They attracted spectators and participants from across the Mediterranean world, turning Olympia into a bustling hub of commerce and cultural exchange. This influx of visitors was a boon for the local economy, much like hosting the Olympics today is a financial windfall for the host city. Merchants, craftsmen, and all manner of traders flocked to the games, peddling their wares to a captive audience. Think of it as a giant ancient marketplace where you could snag a souvenir amphora or a tasty snack while watching men wrestle in the nude. Yes, you heard me right. Competing in the buff was a thing, ostensibly to celebrate the human form, though it also helped ensure no hidden weapons or performance-enhancing toga pockets. The Olympics were a microcosm of Greek society, with all its triumphs and tribulations on full display. They were a testament to the Greeks' love of competition, their penchant for drama, and their complex relationship with honor and deceit. They reveal a world where the boundaries between sports and politics, glory and scandal were constantly blurred. In short, the ancient Olympics were as much about human nature as they were about athletic achievement, a stage where the best and worst of Greek society played out under the watchful eyes of the gods. So next time you catch an Olympic event on TV, spare a thought for those athletes of yore. They may not have had high-tech gear or global media coverage, but they played a game just as complex and cutthroat. The ancient Olympics were a heady mix of skill, strategy, and spectacle proof that the more things change, the more they stay the same. As we continue digging into the annals of history, we'll see just how deep these roots of scandal and spectacle run. Stay tuned for more tales from the past that are as shocking as they are enlightening. Speaking of the more things change, the more they stay the same, let's veer off the well-trodden paths of ancient sporting scandals and head into the fog-enshrouded mystery of the Roman Ninth Legion. This isn't your typical whodunit. It's more of a where-did-they-go scenario, with a dash of military intrigue and a sprinkle of bureaucratic chaos. Picture it as Rome's version of a missing persons case, but with a few thousand heavily armed individuals. So, what exactly happened to the Ninth Legion? Here's the skinny, We know it was a formidable force stationed in Britain in the early 2nd century AD, doing what Romans did best, expanding their empire and making new friends, often at the point of a gladius. But after a certain point, the ninth just kind of vanished from the historical record. Poof, gone. It's like they were the ancient world's Houdini act, minus the dramatic escape plans. Now, before we dive headlong into conspiracy theories, let's set the stage with some hard facts, because we're all about that here. The ninth was known as Legio IX Hispana, or the Spanish Legion, and it was part of Rome's military machine that stretched across 3 continents, boasting around 30 legions at its height. These guys were the Roman Empire's version of a multi-tool, versatile, reliable, and indispensable for holding down the fort, or, in this case, the empire. Their last confirmed mention on record is around 108 AD in York, England, where they were building a fortress, probably grumbling about the weather while wearing sandals in the rain. Fast forward a bit, and the ninth is conspicuously absent from the list of legions present during the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius. So, what gives? How does a whole legion just disappear? Into the theories. The first, and most dramatic, is that they were wiped out by a barbarian uprising. Cue the mental image of brave Romans fighting tooth and nail against swarming hordes. It's a compelling story, sure, and one that stirs the imagination. But, like any good myth, it's not quite airtight. You see, the Romans weren't shy about documenting their military disasters. If anything, they were quite melodramatic about it. If the ninth had been obliterated, you'd expect at least one scribe to jot down a note, perhaps lamenting the loss of so many good soldiers or, more realistically, the logistical nightmare of replacing them. Another theory suggests that the ninth was simply redeployed, sent to the Eastern Front to deal with Rome's perennial headache, the Parthians. A glamorous assignment it was not. The Parthian Empire, located in what is now Iran and Iraq, was Rome's arch-nemesis, and the two powers had been butting heads for centuries. If the legion was indeed transferred there, they might have met their end in a less cinematic and decidedly more mundane fashion, worn down by years of service in a grueling, far-off campaign. But again, the records are silent. Then there's the possibility that they were disbanded, victims of the empire's notorious bureaucratic reshuffles. Rome was an empire of lists and ledgers, a place where paperwork was almost as revered as the pantheon of gods. Yet anyone who's ever dealt with a government office knows how things can slip through the cracks. Perhaps the ninth's disappearance was nothing more than a clerical oversight, a cosmic shrug from fate that left them expunged from the annals of history. This brings us to the heart of the mystery, the allure of the unknown. There's something undeniably tantalizing about a vanished legion. It's the stuff of legends, where reality fades into the mist, leaving room for stories to sprout. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good mystery? It's why people are still fascinated by things like Amelia Earhart or the lost colony of Roanoke. The Ninth Legion taps into that same curiosity, that same need to solve the unsolvable. But while the romantic in us might picture a grand battle or soldierly heroics, the historian must acknowledge a less glamorous truth. Sometimes, history is less about gallant tales and more about the mundane realities of life. Soldiers might have deserted, or the legion could have been broken up into smaller units, their identities slowly eroded over time. The Roman Empire, for all its grandeur, was a place where the grind of everyday life often overshadowed the epic. Economically, too, the ninth's disappearance played into the broader context of Roman Britain. Holding the line against the so-called barbarians was an expensive business, and the empire was always hunting for ways to cut costs. It's not unreasonable to think that the ninth's fate was sealed by the cold calculus of imperial budget cuts, a casualty of fiscal pragmatism rather than martial glory. The truth, as it often does, likely lies in a mix of these theories. The Ninth Legion's disappearance is a puzzle with missing pieces, a tantalizing riddle that continues to echo through the ages. Its story reminds us that history isn't always neat and tidy. Sometimes it's a messy web of half-remembered events, lost records, and the whims of those who wrote or didn't write the histories. So, as we ponder the fate of the ninth, let's appreciate the mystery for what it is, a testament to the complexities of the past, a reminder that even the mightiest empires had moments of confusion and chaos. And who knows? Maybe one day a long-lost scroll or a forgotten inscription will surface, shedding new light on the fate of those Roman soldiers. Until then, we're left with our theories, our imaginations, and the enduring enigma of the legion that vanished into history's shadows. Leaving behind the vanishing act of the Ninth Legion, we journey eastward to a tale of power, intrigue, and a woman who refused to be a mere footnote in history. Enter Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever rule China in her own name, a feat so singular that even today it reads like a page-turner of ambition and audacity. Her life was one part Game of Thrones, 2 parts Machiavellian chess, with a sprinkle of ancient gossip for good measure. Wu Zetian was born in 624 AD during the Tang dynasty, a period marked by a cultural renaissance and political upheaval. She started her climb up the imperial ladder as a concubine to Emperor Taizong. Now, in a world where being a concubine was more a position than a title, Wu was just one among many vying for the emperor's attention. But Wu had something her rivals lacked, a mind as sharp as a scholar's quill and ambition as fierce as a tiger. When Taizong passed away in 649 AD, Wu could have faded into the background, retiring to a convent as was custom for former concubines. Instead, she defied convention and found her way back to court, this time as the consort of the new emperor Gaozong, Taizong's son. From concubine to empress consort, Wu's rise was no fairy tale. It was a calculated ascent, marked by strategic alliances and ruthless elimination of rivals. Let's be clear, Wu Zetian's path to power was paved with more than just opportunity and talent. Accusations of poisoning, murder, and manipulation dogged her every step. There's a particularly juicy tale of Wu allegedly strangling her own infant daughter to frame the reigning empress, thus clearing her path to the top. True or not, the story stuck, and it gave her critics ample ammunition. By 655 AD, Wu had ousted Empress Wang and secured her position as empress consort. Yet, for Wu, being second in command was never the end game. When Gaozong suffered a debilitating stroke, she took the reins of the empire, co-ruling, and eventually ruling in her own right. Now, handling the affairs of an empire with a population of around 50 million wasn't exactly a part-time gig. Wu proved to be a capable, albeit controversial, ruler. She reformed the bureaucracy, promoted merit over aristocracy, and even expanded the empire's borders. But her reign was not without its darker chapters. Wu Zetian's rule was characterized by a purging of her enemies with a ruthlessness that would make a mob boss blush. She established the secret police, a network of spies that would make the Stasi envious, rooting out dissent with brutal efficiency. Stories of torture and executions abound, painting a picture of a reign underpinned by fear. Yet one must wonder how much of this was real, and how much was myth spun by those who could not stomach a woman wielding ultimate power. Speaking of myths, let's talk about the accusation that Wu poisoned her rivals left, right, and center. While it's tempting to envision her as some ancient poisoner supreme, the reality is likely less theatrical. The Tang court was a hotbed of intrigue, where accusations were flung around like confetti at a wedding. Wu's enemies were as eager to discredit her as she was to maintain her grip on power. It's a case of history being written by the survivors, with Wu often cast as the villain. Economically, Wu's reign was a time of considerable development. She implemented agricultural reforms that boosted productivity and increased state revenues. She also promoted Buddhism, which, aside from her personal devotion, was a strategic move to garner support from influential Buddhist communities. Her establishment of the Zhou dynasty in 690 AD was a bold political maneuver, underscoring her claim as the legitimate ruler. Yet, the price of maintaining power was high, both in terms of human lives and economic strain. The secret police and constant purges took their toll on the empire's coffers, not to mention the psychological impact on the populace living under constant surveillance. Wu Zetian's reign ended in 705 AD, when she was in her 80s. A remarkable feat of longevity, both personally and politically. She was forced to abdicate in a palace coup orchestrated by those who had had enough of her iron grip. Yet, even in her downfall, Wu managed to secure her legacy, retiring peacefully rather than facing the ignominious fate that befell many deposed rulers. So, what do we make of Wu Zetian's legacy? Was she a tyrant who ruled with an iron fist, or a capable leader who defied the odds in a patriarchal society? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. Wu's story is less about good versus evil and more about the complexities of power and the lengths one will go to keep it. Her reign reminds us that history is not merely a tale of kings and battles, but of individuals who shaped the world in ways both profound and subtle. In the grand tapestry of history, Wu Zetian's life is a vivid thread, a testament to the fact that power, once tasted, is a hard thing to relinquish. Her story challenges us to reconsider our perceptions of leadership and legacy. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about the cost of ambition and the nature of those who dare to defy conventions. In the end, Wu Zetian was not just the only woman to rule China in her own name, she was a symbol of the enduring struggle for power, a reminder that history's greatest stories are often those that refuse to be neatly boxed into tales of heroes and villains. And there you have it, Wu Zetian, a woman who played the Game of Thrones long before it became a cultural phenomenon. Her life, marked by scandal, ambition, and an unyielding drive, leaves us with a legacy as complex and multifaceted as the woman herself. As we close this chapter of forgotten ancient scandals, let Wu's story serve as a reminder that the past is never as distant as it seems. It is always there, whispering its lessons, if only we're willing to listen. Athens, 470 BC, was not exactly a quiet little corner of the Mediterranean, with a population of roughly 140,000, give or take a few thousand, depending on the latest census counting goats as citizens. It was a bustling hub of commerce, culture, and what some might generously call political debate. Into this vibrant, noisy chaos stepped a young Socrates who, let's just say, wasn't winning any beauty contests. The man himself was famously described as looking like a cross between a stork and a satyr, with a face that might have been sculpted out of leftover clay. But what Socrates lacked in aesthetics, he more than made up for with his mind. He was born into a pretty standard Athenian household, the son of a stonemason named Sophroniscus and a midwife named Phaenarete. If his early life were a sitcom, it would have been called Growing Up Average. Yet, from those unassuming beginnings, Socrates was destined to become a philosophical rock star, or at least Athens' version of one. This transformation wasn't due to some divine intervention or a freakish accident involving a vat of chemicals. It was all about his propensity to ask questions that had everyone scratching their heads. Now, Athens was the kind of place where ideas were exchanged like gossip at a hair salon. The city was an intellectual melting pot, and there was no shortage of voices eager to be heard. However, young Socrates had a knack for asking questions that were less about getting answers and more about revealing the absurdity of the answers people thought they had. He didn't just want to know what people thought, he wanted to know why they thought it. Picture him as the original internet troll, but with a genuine thirst for knowledge instead of a penchant for chaos. Socrates' education was as unconventional as his grooming habits. Forget the ivy-covered halls of academia. His classroom was the open air of Athens' agora, the bustling marketplace. Here he met an assortment of mentors, each more eccentric than the last. Take Archelaus, a philosopher who liked to dabble in physics before it was cool. He introduced Socrates to the idea that the universe could be understood through reason and observation. Anaxagoras, another intellectual giant, taught him that the sun was a red-hot stone rather than a chariot driven by a sun god. Talk about thinking outside the temple. Yet, perhaps the most influential of his mentors was a man named Diotima, though technically she was more a conversational influence than a full-time teacher. Diotima, a priestess, had a thing or two to say about love and beauty that would later shape Socrates' most famous dialogues. She helped him understand that love was less about the physical and more about the intellectual and spiritual connection. It's like she gave Socrates the original TED Talk on the subject long before TED Talks were a thing. By the time Socrates was in his 30s, he was well on his way to becoming a local legend. People flocked to hear his debates, not because he had the answers, but because he had the questions. His method, now famously known as the Socratic method, involved cross-examining his fellow Athenians to expose contradictions and stimulate critical thinking. It was less about proving people wrong and more about collaboratively searching for truth, or at least that's what he told them. His sharp wit and relentless questioning made him both a beloved and irritating figure. Imagine being cornered at a party by a guy who insists you explain why you believe the sky is blue. That was Socrates in a nutshell. Despite his growing fame, Socrates maintained a lifestyle that can only be described as minimalistic, or, to put it less kindly, borderline ascetic. He wandered the streets barefoot, his robes more patchwork than couture, a walking advertisement for the eat to live, don't live to eat philosophy. He famously claimed that he was rich because he was content with so little. In today's terms, he'd be the guy who shows up at a tech conference in a threadbare hoodie, claiming to have unlocked the secret to happiness while everyone else is just hoping for free Wi-Fi. Socrates' rise to prominence was not only a testament to his intellect, but also to the vibrant society that Athens had become. The city was a buzzing hive of democracy, a novel concept at the time, where citizens excluding women, slaves, and non-citizens, of course, could engage in public debate and decision-making. This political landscape was fertile ground for a thinker like Socrates, who thrived on dialogue and the exchange of ideas. If Athens were a rock concert, Socrates was the philosopher who crashed the stage and started a jam session. Yet, as much as Athens loved to celebrate its thinkers, it also loved to challenge them. Socrates became known for his peculiar brand of wisdom, which famously involved claiming that he knew nothing. It was this very claim that set him apart and made him a figure of intrigue. In a city where everyone was trying to outsmart each other, Socrates' admission of ignorance was both disarming and endearing. It was like finding out that the emperor had no clothes, except in this case the emperor was fully aware and kind of okay with it. As Socrates continued to question everything and everyone, he carved out a niche for himself as the gadfly of Athens. He prided himself on being a nuisance to those who thought they were wise, shaking them out of their intellectual complacency. His method was simple: ask questions until the person he was talking to either had an epiphany or a mild existential crisis. Either way, it was a win for Socratic dialogue. Socrates' sharp wit did not go unnoticed by the playwrights of Athens, who often portrayed him in comedic plays. Aristophanes famously lampooned him in The Clouds, where Socrates was depicted as a head-in-the-clouds thinker, literally suspended in a basket to better contemplate the heavens. It was all in good fun, but it also captured the essence of how Athenians viewed this peculiar philosopher. A man with his head so full of questions, it was a wonder it didn't float away. In the end, Socrates' early life in Athens was marked by a relentless pursuit of knowledge and a refusal to accept easy answers. He was a product of his time, shaped by the bustling city that was both his playground and his stage. His appearance may have been unconventional, his lifestyle simplistic, but his mind was a force to be reckoned with. As he wandered the streets, asking questions that echoed through the ages, Socrates laid the groundwork for a legacy that would outlast even the mighty city of Athens itself. Socrates, ever the wanderer of Athens' streets, was known for turning the agora into his personal stage, a place where his questions danced like sparks in a philosophical bonfire. His method of inquiry was as persistent as a toddler asking why. For the 100th time, only Socrates had the intellectual firepower of a seasoned scholar. If the Athenian elite thought they could escape his relentless questioning, they were in for a rude awakening. His inquiries were like a philosophical version of "gotcha" journalism, leaving many an Athenian with their intellectual pants down. Take, for instance, his famous encounter with Euthyphro, a so-called expert on piety. The dialogue began with a seemingly innocent question: what exactly is piety? But quickly devolved into a Socratic trap. Euthyphro's definitions were systematically dismantled until he was left floundering like a fish out of water, gasping for a coherent thought. Socrates was the kind of guy who could make even the most self-assured minds doubt themselves, leaving his conversational partners reconsidering their life choices. Socrates operated in a time when Athens was the intellectual capital of the world, an ancient Silicon Valley of ideas. The city was bursting with thinkers, poets, and politicians, each convinced they had the golden ticket to wisdom. Yet Socrates, with his persistently probing questions, unmasked the hubris of the intellectual elite. It was as if he had a personal vendetta against assumptions, and he pursued it with the fervor of a conspiracy theorist, only without the tinfoil hat. The Socratic method, which evolved from his persistent questioning, became a cornerstone of Western thought. At its heart was the idea that knowledge was not a static possession, but a dynamic process of inquiry. Forget memorizing facts. Socrates was all about thinking critically, a skill just as valuable in ancient Athens as it is today amidst our modern information overload. His method was less about finding the right answer and more about understanding the complexities of the question. It was like peeling an onion of wisdom layer after pungent layer. What truly made Socrates' method revolutionary was its impact on education. Before him, teaching was often a one-way street, with knowledge handed down from teacher to student like a family heirloom. Socrates, however, turned education into a two-way dialogue, a collaborative search for truth. Imagine a classroom where students are encouraged not just to learn, but to challenge and question. That's the legacy of Socrates, a legacy that would shape the educational practices of ancient Greece and beyond, echoing into the lecture halls of today. But let's not romanticize Socrates too much. His dialogues, while groundbreaking, could also be maddening. He had a knack for leaving his interlocutors in a state of intellectual vertigo, dizzy from the philosophical merry-go-round. His style was at once humorous and infuriating, like a stand-up comedian with a PhD. In The Apology, for instance, Socrates famously compared himself to a gadfly, a necessary irritant to the state's somnolent horse. He had a unique talent for making people squirm, a skill that was as entertaining as it was enlightening. Socrates' dialogues were peppered with humour, often at the expense of those who thought themselves wise. His method was like a philosophical roast, where the guest of honour was the concept of certainty. He would begin with simple questions, lulling his conversational partners into a false sense of security before dismantling their arguments with the precision of a master craftsman. It was a performance that left audiences both amused and introspective, a reminder that wisdom often begins with admitting one's ignorance. While Socrates' approach made him a beloved figure to some, it also earned him a fair share of enemies. The Athenian elite, who preferred their ideas unchallenged and their egos unbruised, often found themselves on the receiving end of his relentless questioning. It was like being caught in an intellectual cross-examination, and not everyone appreciated the Socratic spotlight. Yet, for all the discomfort he caused, Socrates was driven by an insatiable curiosity, a genuine desire to understand the world and the people in it. One might wonder what fueled Socrates' relentless pursuit of truth. Was it a love of wisdom, a disdain for falsehoods, or perhaps a bit of both? Whatever the reason, his legacy is undeniable. By turning questioning into an art form, Socrates laid the groundwork for the critical thinking that would become the bedrock of Western philosophy. His legacy was a testament to the power of inquiry, a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come not from knowing, but from asking. As Socrates continued to ply his trade in the streets of Athens, his influence spread far beyond the city's walls. His dialogues, preserved by disciples like Plato, became the intellectual currency of the ancient world. They were a masterclass in rhetoric and logic, a testament to the power of dialogue in the pursuit of truth. While Socrates himself left no written records, his ideas became immortalized through the works of his followers, ensuring that his method would outlast the man himself. Yet, despite his growing fame, Socrates remained a man of simple tastes, unconcerned with wealth or material possessions. His was a life devoted to the pursuit of knowledge, a journey that was as humbling as it was enlightening. As he wandered the streets of Athens, barefoot and unassuming, Socrates was a living embodiment of the intellectual humility he preached. His legacy was a reminder that wisdom is not about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions. And so, Socrates' story continued, a tale of a philosopher who dared to question everything, even in the face of opposition. His method, his humour, and his unwavering commitment to truth made him a legend in his own time, a figure whose influence would reverberate through the ages. As we leave Socrates in the midst of his intellectual journey, we see a man whose questions would continue to echo in the minds of thinkers for generations to come. And so, with Socrates' questions setting the intellectual world ablaze, let's zoom out and take a look at the Athens that was both his muse and his eventual executioner. Athens during Socrates' heyday was not just a city, it was an idea, a bustling metropolis of roughly 140,000 souls, give or take a few slaves and visiting philosophers. It was a democracy, albeit one with a very selective definition of citizen, a place where every man, not woman, mind you, could voice his opinions, provided he wasn't too busy rowing a trireme or tilling the rocky soil. Now, speaking of triremes, let's talk about the Peloponnesian War, that marathon of a conflict that stretched from 431 to 404 BC. Consider it Athens' very own long, grueling episode of Survivor, complete with alliances, betrayals, and an eventual blindside. This war pitted Athens against Sparta and their respective allies, dragging on for 27 years, a period so long that even Zeus might have lost interest. The war was as much about ideology as it was about territory, with Athens embodying the naval, democratic spirit, while Sparta played the role of the land-loving, oligarchic heavyweight. The Peloponnesian War was a game-changer, a wrecking ball to the social and political structures of Athens. It drained the city's coffers faster than a compulsive gambler on payday. The war's costs were astronomical, with Athens' treasury hemorrhaging talents, ancient currency, not musical skills, at a rate that would make even today's defense contractors blush. The economic strain was palpable, and when things got particularly dire, Athens even resorted to melting down statues of the gods for cash. Talk about angering the divine. In this climate of chaos and loss, Socrates' probing questions were less a welcome distraction and more a reminder of the city's intellectual turmoil. He was the guy pointing out that the emperor, or in this case, the assembly, had no clothes, while everyone else was busy trying to stitch together a new toga. The war had left Athens' leadership looking for scapegoats, and Socrates, with his relentless questioning and refusal to toe the line, fit the bill perfectly. Let's not sugarcoat it. Socrates was a thorn in the side of the Athenian status quo. He was like that one friend who insists on bringing up politics at a family dinner, only to drop a truth bomb and watch the chaos unfold. His dialogues exposed the weaknesses in the Athenian political system, and while his intentions were to foster genuine understanding, it didn't stop the powers that be from feeling threatened. After all, it's hard to maintain authority when someone keeps pulling the rug out from under your assertions. By the time the dust settled on the Peloponnesian War, Athens was a shadow of its former self. The city had surrendered to Sparta in 404 BC, and the once vibrant democracy was replaced by the 30 tyrants. A short-lived oligarchy that made Socrates' habit of questioning everything seem downright rebellious. Although the democracy was restored within a year, the damage to Athens' psyche was done. The citizens were left with a cocktail of fear, anger, and a thirst for stability, emotions ripe for scapegoating. Enter Socrates' trial in 399 BC, an event that would make any modern-day courtroom drama look like a tea party. The charges? Corrupting the youth and impiety. Essentially, spreading his dangerous ideas and not respecting the gods. His trial was less about justice and more about making a statement, a way for Athens to exorcise its post-war demons by targeting a convenient intellectual pariah. It's almost as if the city was saying, "Look, we may have lost the war, but at least we're not letting this guy corrupt the next generation." Socrates' trial was a spectacle, a blend of absurdity and tragedy that could have been scripted by Aristophanes himself. Imagine a courtroom where the defendant openly mocks the proceedings, suggesting that instead of being punished, he should be rewarded with free meals for life, a kind of ancient version of a lifetime achievement award for annoying people. The jury, comprised of 501 Athenian citizens, was hardly amused. In the end, they voted to convict him by a narrow margin, a decision that reveals more about the Athenian mindset than about Socrates' guilt. The trial's climax was a choice between exile and hemlock, a potent poison with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Socrates, ever the contrarian, chose the latter, turning his execution into a final act of philosophical defiance. Even in death he remained a gadfly, a reminder to Athens that the pursuit of truth should never be silenced. It's no wonder that his final words, as reported by Plato, included a debt owed to Asclepius, the god of healing. Was it a nod to the idea that death was a cure for life's ills, or just another layer of Socratic irony? Your guess is as good as mine. In the end, Socrates' trial was both a farce and a tragedy, a testament to the precarious balance between genius and nuisance. His death left a void in Athens' intellectual landscape, but it also sparked a philosophical legacy that would echo through the ages. It was a reminder that while societies may falter, the pursuit of truth endures. Even as Athens tried to bury its problems with Socrates, it unwittingly sowed the seeds of a philosophical revolution. So, as we leave Socrates' story hanging in the balance, remember this: In a world where questions can be more dangerous than answers, Socrates dared to ask them all. His life and trial were a reflection of a city caught between its ideals and its fears, a city that ultimately chose comfort over inquiry. But, as history has shown, the real power lies not in silencing dissent but in embracing it, a lesson as relevant today as it was in ancient Athens. As Athens grappled with the echoes of its own contradictions, the story of Socrates took on a life of its own, much like a posthumous album release that becomes more popular than anything the artist did alive. You see, Socrates' death might have been the end of the man, but it was just the beginning of the myth. While the hemlock was still settling in his veins, his pupils, particularly the ever-ambitious Plato, were already spinning tales that would immortalize him as the intellectual rock star he never sought to be. Plato, that philosophical powerhouse with a penchant for storytelling, turned Socrates into the centerpiece of his dialogues, much like a director with a favorite actor who just can't stop casting him in every blockbuster. In Plato's hands, Socrates became a larger-than-life figure, the sage whose questions could topple the very pillars of conventional wisdom. It was a bit like turning a local garage band into an arena-filling legend overnight. But here's the twist. While Plato was busy elevating Socrates to the intellectual stratosphere, he was also crafting a narrative that conveniently left out the messy, unglamorous bits of Socrates' actual life. The irony, of course, was thick enough to cut with a knife. Socrates, the very man condemned by Athens for his relentless questioning, was now being hailed as a hero of thought, not just in Athens, but across the ancient world. It's like if the very city that sentenced Galileo later decided to name a telescope after him, a posthumous PR move that screams, "Oops, our bad!" Plato wasn't the only one dressing up Socrates in philosophical finery. Xenophon, another disciple, took a more pragmatic approach, painting Socrates as a kind of moral instructor, a wise old sage dispensing life lessons like some kind of ancient self-help guru. Xenophon's Socrates was a bit more down-to-earth, a reminder that, while the myth was grand, the man was still a guy who spent his days wandering barefoot through the agora, possibly annoying the toga off anyone who dared make eye contact. But let's not forget the economic backdrop that shaped these narratives. Post-war Athens was a city licking its wounds, both financially and socially. The Peloponnesian War had left the economy in tatters, with resources depleted and the once prosperous city struggling to regain its footing. In such times, a figure like Socrates, questioner of the status quo, challenger of authority, became a convenient scapegoat, but also a symbol of resilience and intellectual defiance. His legacy, as crafted by his followers, offered a kind of philosophical balm to a city in search of meaning amidst the rubble of its own grandeur. Now, it's worth noting that while Socrates was busy being immortalized in dialogues and treatises, the practical realities of his life were far less glamorous. He was, after all, a man who lived in relative poverty, someone who cared more about the wealth of wisdom than the wealth of coin. His household, by all accounts, was modest, with Xanthippe, his long-suffering wife, bearing the brunt of his philosophical priorities over practical ones. If Socrates were alive today, he'd probably be the philosopher who insists on discussing existentialism over a dinner of instant noodles. Yet, the myth of Socrates took on a momentum of its own, fueled by his disciples' writings and the growing appetite for philosophical thought in the ancient world. His method of relentless questioning, what we now call the Socratic method, became the bedrock of critical thinking, a legacy that would shape the very foundations of Western philosophy. It's a testament to the power of questions over answers, a reminder that sometimes it's the inquiry, not the conclusion, that has the real staying power. The romantic appeal of Socrates' story is undeniable. Here was a man who dared to stand against the tide, to question the unquestionable, and to challenge the very fabric of Athenian society. Yet the reality was far less tidy. Socrates' Athens was a city of contradictions, a democracy that silenced dissent, and a cultural hub that feared the implications of its own intellectual pursuits. And while Socrates himself claimed ignorance as his only wisdom, his legacy became a testament to the idea that true knowledge begins not with certainty, but with doubt. Think about it, Socrates, the humble philosopher who claimed to know nothing, became the intellectual giant whose shadow loomed large over centuries of thought. His life and death were a paradox, both celebrated and condemned, both revered and reviled. It's the kind of story that reminds us that history often has a sense of irony sharper than any philosopher's wit. As his legend spread, Socrates became a symbol of intellectual courage, a beacon for those who dared to think differently, even if it meant standing alone. His disciples, with their writings, ensured that his method and message endured, shaping the discourse of their time and beyond. They transformed Socrates into a hero of the mind, a figure whose legacy would outlast the very city that once condemned him. And so, the story of Socrates continues, a tale of questions that refuse to fade and ideas that endure. His legacy is a testament to the power of thought, a reminder that while cities may rise and fall, the pursuit of truth remains timeless. As we leave Socrates' story momentarily hanging, we prepare to explore how his teachings continued to influence generations, even as the world around them changed. Stay tuned, because the journey is far from over, and the questions, much like Socrates' spirit, are still very much alive. As we gear up to dissect Socrates' legacy, imagine him stepping out of ancient Athens and into the modern world, like a time traveler squinting at the glow of a smartphone. Would he raise an eyebrow at his own transformation into a meme-worthy icon? You bet. The man who was all about questioning everything now finds himself immortalized in digital shorthand as the quintessential old guy who questions everything. Socrates, who probably never imagined his dialogues being reduced to GIFs, might be both amused and horrified by this 21st century twist. In many ways, Socrates was the ultimate philosophical disruptor, the kind who would have relished the chaos of a Twitter debate. His method, the relentless questioning known as the Socratic method, has found a new home in our digital age, a time when everyone's an expert and the truth is as slippery as an eel in olive oil. Socrates would probably have a field day with the echo chambers of social media, probing them with questions that cut through the noise like a hot knife through butter. His legacy has shaped education systems worldwide, from the hallowed halls of Ivy League universities to the chalk-dusted classrooms of high schools. The Socratic method is a staple in law schools, where students are grilled with questions until they reach either enlightenment or existential dread. It's a teaching tool that encourages critical thinking, a skill as essential today as it was in a bustling Athenian agora. But let's be real. While Socrates might have embraced the idea of challenging young minds, he might also have been slightly bemused by the sheer volume of student loans racked up in his name. Fast forward to today, and Socrates' influence is woven into the very fabric of Western thought. His emphasis on dialogue and inquiry has not only fueled academic discourse, but has also seeped into pop culture. From films and television to literature and beyond, Socrates pops up as a symbol of wisdom, often portrayed as the archetypal wise old man, albeit one who might prefer a toga to a tweed jacket. Yet there's a delicious irony here. Socrates, who lived a life of modest means, is now a cash cow in the intellectual marketplace. His ideas, once free as the Athenian air, are now monetized as courses, seminars, and self-help books promising to unlock your inner philosopher. The commercialization of Socratic wisdom might have him spinning in his grave like a rotisserie chicken, but it also speaks to the enduring appeal of his teachings. Socrates' story is a reminder of the duality of human nature. On one hand, we crave certainty, a neatly wrapped package of truths to cling to. On the other, we are drawn to the questioners, the challengers who dare to unravel those tidy packages and explore the chaos within. Socrates embodied this tension, and his legacy serves as a testament to the power of questions over answers. It's a legacy that challenges us to remain curious, to question our assumptions, and to never settle for easy answers. But let's not get too carried away romanticizing Socrates. The man was, after all, a gadfly, a persistent irritant in Athens' political ointment. His habit of questioning everything from the nature of justice to the existence of the gods made him a lot of enemies, a fact that ultimately led to his trial and execution. It's a stark reminder that while we revere intellectual courage, it often comes at a steep price. And what of Socrates' transformation into a meme? Well, it's a curious twist of fate for a man who never wrote a word, relying instead on his disciples to preserve his teachings. In an age where attention spans have shrunk to the length of a TikTok video, Socratic wisdom distilled into bite-sized pieces might just be the way to keep his spirit alive. It's a reminder that while the medium changes, the message, the importance of inquiry and dialogue remains constant. Socrates' enduring influence is a testament to the timeless nature of his ideas. His legacy is not just a relic of the past, but a living, breathing force that continues to shape the present. In a world that often values certainty over curiosity, Socrates stands as a beacon for the power of questions, a reminder that true wisdom lies not in what we know, but in what we are willing to explore. As we wrap up this journey through Socrates' life and legacy, let's leave with a thought that would surely please the old philosopher himself. The world is full of questions, and each one is an invitation to think deeper, to challenge the status quo, and to embrace the discomfort of not knowing. In doing so, we honor Socrates not just as a figure of history, but as a guide for the future, a future where the pursuit of truth remains the ultimate intellectual adventure. In the arid expanse of the ancient Near East, where the sun didn't just shine but scorched with a vengeance, the Israelites were busy crafting something a little more enduring than pyramids or ziggurats. They were piecing together a legal system. No small feat when your primary resources are sand, sheep, and maybe a few well-placed miracles. At the heart of this endeavor were the 10 Commandments, those iconic tablets that have often been mistaken as the world's most famous to-do list. But, spoiler alert, they were a bit more complex than just, thou shalt not. Now, here's the thing. These commandments weren't just dropped from the sky like some divine Amazon Prime delivery. They were, according to tradition, handed down to Moses on Mount Sinai. Picture this. Moses, aged 80, climbing a mountain for a chat with God, no small task without the aid of a stairmaster. But it wasn't just about the cardio. This was about laying down the law in a way that would outlast kingdoms and empires. And let's be honest, the Israelites needed some structure. After all, they were fresh out of Egypt, a place known for its own set of rigorous, albeit slightly more pyramid-focused, laws. The 10 Commandments, while written in stone, were anything but rigid in their application. They served as a guide for a society trying to balance divine instruction with the harsh realities of desert life. Thou shalt not kill. Sounds straightforward, right? Except when you're in a region where every neighboring tribe is eyeing your goats like a buffet. The commandments acted as a moral compass, but also had the practical job of keeping the community from devolving into chaos every time the water supply ran low. One might ask, why 10? Why not a top 20, or a nice round dozen? The number 10 has a neatness to it, an easy mnemonic for a society where literacy wasn't exactly widespread. In fact, most Israelites wouldn't have had a library card, let alone a library. So, these commandments had to be memorable, pithy, and impactful, like the world's first soundbites. In a world dominated by the likes of Hammurabi's Code, which had more clauses than a poorly written contract, the 10 Commandments were revolutionary in their simplicity. Hammurabi, the Babylonian king, had a code that ran to 282 laws, including some as specific as what to do if a donkey kicked over a neighbor's fence. The Israelites, on the other hand, went for the big picture. They were more concerned with ethics and morality than micromanaging goat disputes. But don't let the brevity fool you. These commandments packed a punch. They weren't just about personal behavior. They were a framework for societal governance. Honor thy father and thy mother was less about being a teacher's pet and more about ensuring respect for elders, a vital component in a tribal society where wisdom was passed down orally. This wasn't just about keeping peace at the dinner table, it was about maintaining social order. And let's not forget the divine aspect. God's role in all this wasn't just as a cosmic lawmaker, but as a covenant partner. The commandments were part of a larger agreement, a heavenly contract that said, you follow these, and I'll make sure you have a land flowing with milk and honey. It was a quid pro quo arrangement with slightly higher stakes than your average neighborly handshake. In terms of enforcement, there were no police, no courts, at least not in the way we think of them today. The community itself was the judge, jury, and, if necessary, executioner. The social pressure to adhere to these laws was immense. Violating them wasn't just a legal misstep, it was a betrayal of the entire community. But here's where it gets even more interesting. While the 10 Commandments might have been the headline act, the Israelites didn't stop there. They developed a whole body of law, known as the Torah, which expanded on these principles. The Torah included everything from civil and criminal laws to ritual and ceremonial guidelines. It was less about punitive measures and more about creating a cohesive society. The Israelites were nothing if not thorough. The Torah was not static, it evolved, reflecting the changing circumstances of the Israelite people. As they transitioned from nomadic tribes to settled agrarian communities, their laws adapted accordingly. This adaptability was crucial for survival, especially when the nearest form of dispute resolution was often a sharp rock. In truth, Hebrew law was less about divine fiat and more about the practicalities of living in a community where everyone knew everyone else's business, which, when you think about it, is a pretty effective way to keep people honest. You can't exactly lie or cheat when your neighbour's tent is a stone's throw away and the community grapevine is faster than any social media feed. Hebrew law, therefore, was a blend of divine inspiration and practical necessity, a legal framework that has influenced countless societies. The commandments' appeal lies in their universality and timelessness, managing to be both divine edicts and practical guidelines for living. They were, and in many ways still are, the cornerstone of a legal and ethical tradition that has shaped the world. So, there you have it. The 10 Commandments, a top 10 list with staying power, forged in the crucible of ancient survival and divine promise. Not just a set of rules, but a foundation for a new kind of society, one that aimed to balance the celestial with the everyday. In the end, maybe the real miracle wasn't the burning bush or the parted sea, but the simple, enduring power of words carved in stone. Speaking of enduring power, let's turn our gaze from the stone tablets to the nitty-gritty of daily life under Hebrew law. Imagine this. You're part of a society where the land doesn't just hold your tent pegs, it holds your entire livelihood. In ancient Israel, property wasn't just about owning a patch of earth, it was about survival. And guess what? The laws reflected that. Forget about divine mysteries for a moment, this was about earthly realities. The law of the land, quite literally, was the Jubilee, a concept that would make even the most lenient landlord break into a cold sweat. Every 50 years, all land was to be returned to its original family owners. Talk about a reset button. This wasn't just a quaint tradition, it was a social safety net. It ensured that no family could permanently lose their ancestral land, thereby preventing a perpetual underclass. The underlying philosophy? Keep the scales from tipping too far into inequality. A noble idea, though implementing it could be as tricky as herding cats across a desert. Now, before you start thinking this was all kumbaya and community hugs, let's get real. This wasn't some altruistic utopia. The Jubilee was less about generosity and more about stability. By keeping land within families, it maintained social cohesion. After all, when your neighbours have been your neighbours for centuries, there's a vested interest in keeping things peaceful. It's hard to plot against someone when you're going to be sharing a fence with their grandchildren. Moving on to matters of the pocket, let's talk debt. The Hebrew law had a radical approach. Every 7 years, debts were forgiven. Imagine that in today's credit card-obsessed society. But it wasn't about letting people off the hook. It was about preventing economic servitude. Debt cancellation was a societal pressure valve, ensuring that a bad harvest or an illness didn't spiral into generational poverty. Of course, this didn't mean lenders were left high and dry. They had to be discerning, and likely a bit cautious about whom they handed out shekels to. Kind of like the ancient version of a credit score. And speaking of servitude, Hebrew law had a distinct take on labor. Slavery, though present, was regulated in a way that might surprise modern readers. Hebrew slaves were to be freed in the 7th year of service, a built-in liberation clause that seems almost progressive. But before we start applauding, let's remember, this wasn't purely out of the goodness of anyone's heart. It was a pragmatic approach to prevent social unrest and ensure that everyone had a chance to participate in the economic life of the community. Plus, there's a certain efficiency to ensuring that your workforce doesn't become too disgruntled. After all, it's hard to build a cohesive society if everyone's plotting their escape. Let's dig a little deeper into these social dynamics. In a world where the average person was a farmer, the land was the economy. It wasn't just a backdrop for biblical stories, it was the stage for everyday life. The laws reflected this reality, balancing the need for individual prosperity with communal stability. Property and debt laws weren't just legalese, they were the scaffolding of society. Take the example of gleaning laws. Farmers were instructed to leave the edges of their fields unharvested, allowing the poor and the stranger to gather grain. This wasn't just charity, it was economic policy. It ensured that even the least fortunate had access to food, reducing the likelihood of theft or rebellion. It was a system designed to keep the peace by keeping bellies full, proof that sometimes the best defense is a good harvest. But let's not romanticize it too much. These laws, while innovative, operated within a society that was often harsh and unforgiving. Nature didn't negotiate, and neither did neighboring tribes. The economic system was a dance between divine edict and desert reality, a balancing act that required constant vigilance and adaptation. And as for the myth of divine decree, let's be clear, these laws weren't handed down as immutable commands from on high. They evolved, responding to the shifting sands of political and economic need. The Israelites were pragmatic, crafting laws that ensured survival in a volatile world. They recognized that a rigid legal system would snap under pressure like a brittle reed in a desert wind. In the end, Hebrew law was a complex mosaic of idealism and pragmatism. It sought to create a society where divine inspiration met human necessity, where the ledger was as important as the legend. These laws weren't just about maintaining order. They were about crafting a world where the community could thrive, even in the harshest conditions. So, as we leave this chapter open for further exploration, remember this: the true genius of Hebrew law lay not in its divine origin, but in its human application. It was a system designed not just to survive, but to endure. A testament to the resilience of a people who understood that sometimes the best way to honor the divine is to take care of each other. And that, my friends, is a legacy carved into the very landscape of history. Speaking of legacies, let's chat about how the Hebrew law carved out more than just legal frameworks. It sculpted the very soul of society. Picture a world where community wasn't just a quaint idea, but a survival mechanism. Family wasn't just who you had dinner with, it was your social security, your legal team, and sometimes, yes, your biggest headache. Hebrew law was like the ancient version of Dr. Phil, setting boundaries and expectations for family and social dynamics. In this tight-knit world, family dynamics were as layered as a baklava. The patriarchal system was the name of the game, with the father, the paterfamilias, if you will, serving as the household's CEO, and occasional HR department. But this wasn't just a game of masculine monopoly. Women, while often relegated to the sidelines in historical narratives, played pivotal roles in maintaining household stability. They managed domestic affairs with the precision of a seasoned project manager, keeping the gears of daily life well-oiled. Hebrew law laid down the rules of engagement, ensuring that family disputes didn't escalate to the level of biblical drama. Now, let's talk about gender roles. Before you roll your eyes at the old-school patriarchal setup, remember that women weren't exactly sitting around knitting by the campfire. Sure, men held the reins in public life, but women were the unsung heroines of domestic management. They were the weavers of social fabric, quite literally and metaphorically. From managing household provisions to making key decisions in the domestic sphere, their influence was subtle but significant. Hebrew law recognized this by providing certain protections for women, like the right to a dowry, which was a significant financial safety net in a society where economic stability was as elusive as a desert mirage. But let's not romanticize this into some ancient feminist utopia. Gender roles were as rigid as those stone tablets, and breaking them was not exactly encouraged. Women were largely expected to produce heirs and maintain the home, a job description that was as thankless as it was essential. Yet, within these constraints, women wielded a quiet power, often influencing family decisions and social dynamics from behind the scenes. It was a delicate balance of power, like a game of chess where the queen had to navigate carefully but could change the course of the game with a single move. Community responsibilities were another cornerstone of Hebrew law. Living in a society where everyone knew your business meant that communal harmony was not just desirable, it was crucial. Hebrew law was like the original neighborhood watch program, ensuring that everyone played by the rules or faced the consequences. The infamous eye for an eye principle was less about vengeance and more about maintaining social equilibrium. It was a stark reminder that actions had consequences and that justice, while sometimes harsh, was a communal affair. The laws extended beyond simple retributive justice. They promoted a sense of collective responsibility, where caring for the less fortunate was not just a moral imperative but a legal one. The laws of gleaning, as we touched on earlier, were part of a broader social welfare system. The community was expected to support widows, orphans, and strangers, ensuring that no one slipped through the cracks of society. This wasn't just about altruism. It was about preventing the kind of social unrest that could tear a community apart faster than a sandstorm. And here's where things get eyebrow-raising. Hebrew law occasionally wandered into the territory of the bizarre, with commandments that would make even the most avant-garde reality TV producers blush. Take, for instance, the prohibition against wearing garments of mixed fibers, a rule that would send modern fashionistas into a tailspin. This wasn't just a sartorial choice, it was a symbolic gesture, a way of maintaining purity and distinction in every aspect of life. Or consider the dietary laws, which dictated everything from what to eat to how to prepare it. These rules were less about culinary preferences and more about establishing a distinct identity in a world where cultural assimilation was a constant threat. Speaking of identity, let's tackle the myth that Hebrew law was all about divine commands etched in stone. The reality was far more nuanced. These laws were a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving as the Israelites faced new challenges and realities. They were a blend of divine inspiration and human necessity, crafted to suit the needs of a people navigating the complexities of life in a harsh and unforgiving environment. In the grand tapestry of history, Hebrew law stands out not just for its divine claims, but for its practical brilliance. It was a system that understood human nature, with all its flaws and potential, and sought to channel it towards a cohesive and functioning society. The laws were both a reflection of the divine and a mirror to the human condition, capturing the essence of what it meant to live in a community where the stakes were as high as Mount Sinai itself. So, as we pause to reflect on the intricate dance of social norms and structures shaped by Hebrew law, let's remember that these weren't just rules. They were the fabric of a society striving to survive and thrive against the odds. They were a testament to the resilience and adaptability of a people who understood that sometimes the best way to honor the divine was to take good care of each other. And that, my friends, is a story as old as time, yet as relevant as the headlines of today. And speaking of the high stakes at Mount Sinai, let's not forget the political chess game unfolding on the desert sands. Hebrew law wasn't just a divine communique, it was a playbook for power, a Machiavellian masterpiece wrapped in religious garb. The law, my friends, was as much about maintaining control as it was about moral guidance. Think of it as Moses meets Machiavelli, a divine right with a strategic twist. In the ancient Near East, where life was as unpredictable as a reality show plot twist, leaders didn't just rely on charisma or military might to keep their tribes in line. They needed a system, something more enduring than the latest miracle or military conquest. Enter Hebrew law, a tool of governance that was both spiritual and practical, wielded with finesse by those at the top to maintain their grip on power. Let's dive into the dynamics of leadership. Moses, the ultimate lawgiver, wasn't merely a prophet with a penchant for mountaintop chats. He was a political mastermind who understood the power of law as a unifying force. By framing the commandments as divine mandates, he ensured that his authority was rooted in something bigger than himself. It was the ultimate power move, aligning his leadership with the divine to create an unassailable position. It's like the ultimate celebrity endorsement. If God's on your side, who's going to argue? Now, let's talk about the enforcement of these laws. The community was the enforcer, yes, but with a little nudge from the leadership. Think of the elders as the original influencers, keeping the populace in check with a blend of wisdom and, let's face it, a bit of peer pressure. The elders served as local judges and intermediaries, ensuring that disputes were settled before they spiraled into full-blown feuds. It was a decentralized system that allowed for flexibility, but also kept everyone under a watchful eye. Like an ancient version of Neighborhood Watch, but with more sand and less surveillance tech. But here's the kicker. The law wasn't just a tool for maintaining internal order, it was a means of external negotiation. With neighboring tribes eyeing each other like hungry hawks, Hebrew law served as a diplomatic instrument. By presenting a unified legal front, the Israelites could negotiate treaties and alliances with other groups. The law was a badge of civilization in a world where might often made right. It projected an image of order and stability, a valuable currency in a region where chaos was the norm. Let's not ignore the economic implications either. Hebrew law was all about resource management, the economics of survival, if you will. In a society where land was lifeblood, laws around property and inheritance weren't just about fairness, they were about ensuring that power and wealth remained concentrated in the right hands. The Jubilee, debt forgiveness, and gleaning laws weren't just about charity. They were about preventing the kind of economic disparity that could lead to rebellion. After all, a well-fed populace is a compliant one. And let's not forget the savvy manipulation of religious rituals. The laws dictated everything from dietary restrictions to Sabbath observance, creating a rhythm of life that reinforced social cohesion. By embedding religious observance into daily life, the leadership ensured that the community's focus remained on the divine, and by extension on the leaders themselves as intermediaries. It was a brilliant strategy, weaving faith into the fabric of politics. To top it off, the laws were a living document, adaptable and responsive to the shifting sands of political and economic need. This flexibility allowed leaders to modify and reinterpret laws as circumstances demanded, a sort of ancient legislative session in perpetual motion. It was a delicate balancing act, keeping the populace content while ensuring that the leadership's grip on power remained firm. In essence, Hebrew law was a masterclass in political strategy, a testament to the understanding that true power lies not in the sword but in the pen, or, in this case, the chisel. It was a system designed to endure, a blend of divine decree and human cunning. The genius of Hebrew law lay in its ability to adapt, to reflect the realities of life while maintaining the illusion of timeless divine mandate. So, as we leave the political intrigue of Hebrew law hanging tantalizingly, remember this. In the world of ancient Israel, the law was more than rules carved in stone. It was the very foundation of power, a testament to the understanding that faith and politics, when intertwined, can create a legacy as enduring as the stones of Sinai themselves. Stay tuned, because our journey through the sands of time is far from over. Now, let's pull the curtain back on how Hebrew law, that ancient playbook of divine directives and desert pragmatism, has echoed across the centuries into our modern legal systems. If you thought those stone tablets were just collecting dust in some forgotten corner of history, think again. The legacy of Hebrew law is alive and kicking, having traded its chisels for keyboards and its scrolls for statutes. First, let's address the elephant in the courtroom, the concept of justice. Hebrew law gave us the framework for a just society, predicated not on power but on principles. Fast forward a few millennia, and these principles are still the backbone of modern legal dramas, where justice is served with a side of popcorn. The eye for an eye ethos, often misinterpreted as a call for retribution, was really about proportionate justice, a concept that underpins everything from sentencing guidelines to small claims court. Now, let's talk about the Sabbath, that ancient day of rest which has morphed into the weekend, a concept that the modern workforce treats with near sacred devotion. Imagine the horror of laboring through a Sunday. Yet, the Sabbath wasn't just about kicking back, it was a radical idea that everyone deserved rest, rich or poor, slave or free. It was the precursor to labor laws that now protect workers' rights worldwide. So next time you're lounging on a Sunday, remember to thank those ancient Israelites for the R&R, and then there's the Jubilee, that once in 50 years debt-forgiving phenomenon. While today's financial systems would likely implode at the thought, elements of this idea have trickled into modern bankruptcy laws and debt relief programs. The notion that economic resets can prevent societal collapse is still relevant, even if we prefer to manage our debts with spreadsheets and interest rates rather than the blast of a ram's horn. Speaking of economic resets, Hebrew laws on debt forgiveness inspired the principle of fresh starts, a cornerstone of bankruptcy laws in many countries. The ancient idea that debt should not be a life sentence resonates in modern systems that aim to give individuals a second chance, even if it involves a few more forms and considerably less divine intervention. In terms of social justice, Hebrew law's focus on community responsibility laid the groundwork for welfare systems. Those gleaning laws, where landowners left some harvest for the poor, can be seen in today's social safety nets. The idea that society should care for its most vulnerable isn't just ancient benevolence, It's a practical strategy for reducing crime and promoting stability. And while the specifics have evolved, the core belief remains: a well-fed populace is a peaceful one. The influence of Hebrew law even extends to the very structure of our legal systems. The idea of a written law that applies to all, regardless of power or position, was revolutionary. It planted the seeds for modern constitutions and the rule of law, where ideally no one is above it. Not kings, not presidents, not even the most persuasive of lawyers. It's the legal world's equivalent of a level playing field, though some would argue there are a few more hurdles than advertised. Let's not forget the personal responsibility that Hebrew law emphasized. The commandments were about more than just worship. They covered ethics and personal conduct, areas that modern legal systems still grapple with. The idea that law should guide not just actions but intentions is a struggle as old as the tablets themselves. This connection is evident in areas like contract law, where intent can be as important as the ink on the page. And let's have a moment of appreciation for the courtroom drama. If you've ever been captivated by a legal thriller, you can thank the ancient Israelites for setting the stage. Their system of elders, acting as judges, laid the groundwork for our present-day fascination with judicial proceedings, where the stakes are high and the gavel is mightier than the sword, or at least as dramatic. Hebrew law also tackled family dynamics and inheritance, issues that still clog court dockets today. The principle of preserving family property and ensuring fair distribution among heirs echoes in modern inheritance laws. It's a throwback to a time when familial harmony was not just a preference but a necessity for survival. These ancient laws recognized that family feuds could be as destructive as any external threat and sought to mitigate them with clear guidelines. While we're at it, let's give a nod to the dietary laws, which were less about culinary preferences and more about identity. They laid the groundwork for religious freedom and the rights of individuals to practice their beliefs, rights that are fiercely protected in many of today's legal systems. These laws weren't just about what you ate, but about who you were, a precursor to modern discussions on freedom of expression and cultural identity. Finally, let's talk about legacy. Hebrew law's influence is like a river that has carved its way through the bedrock of history, shaping the landscape of modern legal systems. Its principles have been adopted, adapted, and occasionally outright borrowed by cultures and legal systems worldwide. From the Ten Commandments to today's constitutions, these ancient laws have provided a framework for justice, equality, and social responsibility. So, as we wrap up this journey through the sands of time, remember that those ancient laws weren't just about keeping a wandering tribe in line. They were about building a society where justice wasn't just a lofty ideal, but an achievable reality. They taught us that the law is more than rules. It's the fabric of society, woven with the threads of justice, compassion, and community. In today's world, where legal dramas unfold both on-screen and off, the echoes of Hebrew law remind us of the power of words etched in stone. They stand as a testament to the enduring human quest for justice, and the belief that law, at its best, is a guide to living harmoniously in a complex world. And that, dear listeners, is a legacy worth pondering as we navigate our own legal landscapes. Florence, in the late 13th century, was a bit like a medieval soap opera, only with fewer dragons and more double-crossing politicians. Enter Dante Alighieri, a man who would go on to write the Divine Comedy and become Italy's most famous poet. But before Dante became the literary rock star we know, he was just a kid navigating the chaotic political landscape of Florence, kind of like trying to play chess on a board where the pieces keep changing sides. Born in 1265, Dante was a product of his times that were less serene Renaissance and more Game of Thrones with actual consequences. His family, the Alighieris, were minor nobles, which in the Florentine social ladder put them somewhere above the local baker, but below the Medici powerhouses. Dante's early years were spent getting an education that would make today's SAT look like a cakewalk. He studied the trivium and quadrivium fancy terms for grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Yes, education back then meant you had to know a bit of everything, from arguing your point to calculating the trajectory of a star. While young Dante was busy absorbing all this knowledge, Florence was embroiled in a political hot mess. The city was divided between the Guelphs, who supported the Pope, and the Ghibellines, who backed the Holy Roman Emperor. You'd think choosing a side would be straightforward, but in true Florentine fashion, it was even messier than that. The Guelphs themselves split into black Guelphs and white Guelphs, because why have one enemy when you can have two? Dante, ever the contrarian, aligned with the white Guelphs. These guys were the moderates, which in the context of 13th century Florence meant they didn't want to completely torch the city to make a political point. But Florence had other plans, and in 3002 the black Guelphs took control, exiling Dante and his white Guelph buddies. Imagine being kicked out of your hometown because you backed the wrong political horse. That's like being banned from your favorite coffee shop because you didn't like their new pumpkin spice latte. But let's rewind a bit, because Dante's ambitions were as lofty as a cathedral spire long before his exile. He was married to Gemma Donati, a woman from a prominent Florentine family, but his heart belonged to Beatrice Portinari, a lady he saw exactly twice. Yet she became his muse, which is either deeply romantic or wildly impractical. Take your pick. Dante's love for Beatrice was so intense it would make even the most seasoned Tinder user swipe left out of sheer intimidation. Florentine politics, meanwhile, were less about governance and more about personal vendettas. The city's political scene had all the subtlety of a bar brawl, with shifting alliances and sudden betrayals. The constant infighting wasn't just a Florentine pastime, it was practically a civic duty. Imagine a city council meeting where everyone shows up with their own army. That's Florentine politics for you. Dante's involvement in this chaotic stew of intrigue wasn't just a hobby, it was a full-time gig. He served as a prior, a sort of city council member, in 1300. During his term he tried to mediate between the warring factions, but that was about as successful as trying to mediate a Twitter feud. His political career, much like his romantic life, was ambitious, but ultimately doomed by forces beyond his control. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, understanding the political chaos of Dante's Florence is crucial to understanding Dante himself. When he sat down to write the Divine Comedy, he wasn't just penning an epic poem, he was channeling the frustrations and disillusionments of a man exiled from his home, a man who had seen the best and worst of humanity. Dante's journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven was more than just a literary device. It was a reflection of the turbulent world he lived in. So, there you have it, the early life of Dante Alighieri, a man who turned the chaos of his times into one of the most enduring pieces of literature. He may have been a dreamer with his head in the clouds, but he had his feet firmly planted in the muck of Florentine politics. And that, dear friends, is where we leave him for now, standing on the precipice of exile, ready to transform his personal and political battles into the stuff of legend. Standing on the precipice of exile, Dante Alighieri had more than political woes on his mind. You see, while Dante was busy navigating the backstabbing world of Florentine politics, he was also hopelessly entangled in a love story that would make even Shakespeare weep. Enter Beatrice Portinari, the woman who launched 1,000 quatrains and made Dante the poster boy for unrequited love. Cue the violins. Now, when I say Dante saw Beatrice twice, I mean he literally saw her twice. The first encounter was in 1274 when Dante was a mere 9 years old. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill schoolyard crush. Dante claimed it was love at first sight. Beatrice was 8 at the time, so it's safe to say she had other priorities, like, dolls and hopscotch. Fast forward to 1283, Dante ran into Beatrice again. This time, she was a teenaged vision in a red dress, and Dante was a goner. But did they chat over a medieval cappuccino? Nope. Beatrice acknowledged him with a nod, which for Dante was basically the medieval equivalent of a love letter. What follows is the stuff of poetic legend and practical folly. He immortalized this brief moment in his work, Vita Nuova, New Life, a collection of poems and prose that elevate Beatrice to near-divine status. If you think this sounds a bit over the top, you're not wrong. But hey, this was the Middle Ages. A little hyperbole was practically a birthright. But hold your horses, because while Dante was mooning over Beatrice, he was also married to Gemma Donati. Now, if you're picturing a romantic entanglement worthy of a Netflix series, think again. Medieval marriages were less about love and more about family alliances and property. Dante and Gemma tied the knot around 1285, a union orchestrated by their families like two chess pieces positioned for checkmate. They had 3 or possibly 4 children, but historical records are a bit sketchy on the exact number, like an unreliable narrator with a faulty memory card. Let's get real for a moment. Dante's marriage to Gemma was the medieval equivalent of a business merger. While Gemma was from a prominent family, the marriage didn't exactly set the world on fire. She never appears in Dante's writings, not even as a footnote. It's as if she was the background actor in Dante's blockbuster life story, while Beatrice was the star. And who can blame him? Beatrice was his muse, an ethereal figure who inspired his art, while Gemma was the reality he returned to at the end of the day, complete with all the mundane responsibilities that medieval life entailed. But let's not dismiss Gemma too quickly. She held the family fort during Dante's exile, no small feat when your husband is off writing poetry and dodging political enemies. While Dante was penning the Divine Comedy in some far-flung corner of Italy, Gemma was managing the household in Florence. It's like being married to a rock star who's always on tour. Glamorous in theory, but exhausting in practice. As for Beatrice, she married a banker, a man named Simone de Bardi, in 1287. She passed away in 1290, a mere 24 years old. Her death rocked Dante's world and fueled his writing in ways that grief often does. It was the ultimate what could have been scenario, and Dante milked it for all it was worth. In Vita Nuova, he writes about seeing Beatrice in a vision, ascending to heaven, which may seem dramatic until you remember Dante was all about the drama. So what's the takeaway here? Dante's love for Beatrice was as impractical as a chocolate teapot, yet it gave rise to some of the greatest poetry in Western literature. His marriage to Gemma, on the other hand, was the bedrock of his real life, a life filled with the kind of daily grind that rarely makes the history books, but is no less significant. Now, here's a thought worth chewing on. Was Dante's obsession with Beatrice genuine emotion or poetic license? Did he idolize her because she was unattainable, or did he genuinely believe she was his soulmate? And does it even matter? In the end, Beatrice became more than a woman. She became an idea, an artistic ideal that transcended the messy complexities of human relationships. Dante's life was a tapestry of contrasts, romance and reality, politics and poetry, exile and longing. And through it all, he managed to weave a legacy that would endure for centuries. But don't go thinking we've reached the end of the story. There's still much more to explore. From the fiery depths of hell to the celestial heights of paradise, Dante's journey is just getting started. Stay tuned, because the plot is about to thicken in ways you won't want to miss. But before we dive headlong into Dante's grand tour of medieval Italy, let's take a moment to appreciate the glorious train wreck that was his political career. You see, Dante wasn't just a poet with his head in the clouds and feet in the muck. He was also a man who didn't know when to fold 'em. In 1302 he found himself on the receiving end of a political eviction notice, exiled from Florence by the Black Guelphs who decided that having Dante around was about as appealing as a week-old anchovy pizza. Exile in the Middle Ages wasn't just about packing your bags and hitting the road with a bit of wanderlust. No, it was more like being tossed out of your own life and told to make do elsewhere, and not in the find-yourself kind of way. For Dante, this meant leaving behind not only his family and friends, but also any semblance of financial stability. In a world where social connections were your primary currency, Dante's wallet was suddenly looking pretty empty. So, what did Dante, the former Florentine bigwig, do when life gave him lemons? First, he tried to make lemonade, but the lemons were metaphorical and his circumstances were decidedly sour. He wandered from city to city, relying on the patronage of powerful families who appreciated his poetic prowess. It's as if Shakespeare, instead of making it big in London, had to couch surf across England, hoping to land a spot in someone's parlour long enough to scribble out a play or two. And let's not forget Dante's legendary gripe about bread. In his Divine Comedy, he complained about the coarseness of Tuscan bread, which might sound trivial until you realize that bread was the cornerstone of medieval diets. Imagine being so disgruntled by a regional staple that you immortalize it in an epic poem. It's like a New Yorker moving to LA and writing an opus about the horrors of gluten-free bagels. Now, here's where the myth-making kicks in. The romanticized version of Dante's exile paints him as a tragic hero, wandering Italy with a quill in one hand and the weight of the world in the other. In reality, he was more like a medieval freelancer, hustling his way through a network of noble patrons. Sure, he was crafting one of literature's greatest works, but he was also, quite frankly, a man without a home, trying to make ends meet. And let's talk economics for a moment. Without a steady income, Dante had to rely on the generosity of others, which wasn't exactly a stable financial plan. It's estimated that a middling Florentine family might scrape by on 30 florins a year, but Dante's precarious situation often left him on the outside looking in, financially speaking. His wanderings took him to places like Verona and Ravenna, where he found temporary refuge but never the security of a permanent home. This isn't to say that Dante's life on the road was devoid of perks. As a guest of the powerful Scaliger family in Verona, he was afforded certain luxuries. Think of it as the medieval version of house sitting for a friend with a much nicer place. But these arrangements were always temporary, and Dante was keenly aware that his welcome could expire faster than fresh milk in the summer sun. The myth of the exiled poet, however, persists for a reason. There's something undeniably romantic about the image of Dante, a man wronged by politics, turning his suffering into a literary masterpiece. It's the kind of story that appeals to our sense of justice and artistic triumph over adversity. But beneath the myth lies a harsh reality. Dante was a man who, despite his brilliance, was at the mercy of forces beyond his control, both political and economic. And yet, in this uncertainty, he found a muse in adversity. The Divine Comedy wasn't just a product of literary genius. It was born out of necessity, a way for Dante to process his exile and express his disillusionment with the world around him. The poem is as much a critique of the society that cast him out as it is a spiritual journey, reflecting both his personal struggles and broader societal woes. Dante's story is a reminder that sometimes the very circumstances that seem to conspire against us can become the catalyst for our greatest achievements. His exile may have been filled with uncertainty and hardship, but it also provided the fertile ground from which his magnum opus would grow. So, while the myth of the wandering poet is certainly appealing, it's important to remember that the reality was far less glamorous. Dante was a man who had to navigate a world that often seemed indifferent to his genius, and yet he managed to leave a legacy that continues to resonate today. But don't go thinking this is the end of Dante's journey. There's still more to uncover. From his musings on the nature of sin to his visions of celestial glory, Dante's story is far from over. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the labyrinthine mind of one of history's greatest poets. And so, with Dante's exile serving as both his muse and his nemesis, we turn our gaze to the creation of the Divine Comedy, an epic that marries the grandiosity of medieval thought with the gritty realities of life on the road. You might think that writing one of the greatest works of Western literature would require a cozy study, a steady supply of quills, and maybe a motivational poster or two. But Dante had none of these. Instead, he had the medieval equivalent of a writer's nightmare. No permanent address, no steady paycheck, and a looming deadline that was less editorial pressure and more existential crisis. Let's talk structure for a moment. The Divine Comedy is divided into 3 parts: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Each section contains 33 cantos, with an additional introductory canto in the Inferno, bringing the grand total to a neat 100. Why 100? Because in Dante's world, numbers weren't just numbers, they were cosmic symbols. The number 100 was considered perfect, a symbol of divine completeness, something Dante could only dream of achieving in his own turbulent life. And then there's the language. While most medieval poets were content to scribble in Latin, Dante had the audacity to write in the Tuscan dialect. Imagine penning a masterpiece in what was considered the vernacular. It's like Shakespeare writing Hamlets in Cockney. This choice was revolutionary. It not only made his work accessible to the masses, but also elevated the Tuscan dialect to the high art of literature. It's as if Dante took a linguistic selfie and said, "This is Italy, folks." Now, if you're picturing Dante leisurely penning his verses in some quaint Italian villa, think again. He was more likely scribbling furiously in drafty attics or by candlelight in borrowed rooms, dodging the medieval equivalent of eviction notices. And let's not forget the ever-looming spectre of writer's block. Imagine Dante staring at a blank parchment, quill in hand, trying to conjure new circles of hell while a grumpy patron hovers nearby, tapping his foot and checking his sundial. Speaking of patrons, Dante's reliance on their goodwill was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, they provided the material support he desperately needed. On the other, they had opinions. Lots of them. Imagine your boss not only wanting to see quarterly reports, but also having strong feelings about the metaphysical implications of your poetic allegories. It's enough to make anyone's head spin faster than a Florentine political alliance. Economic realities played a significant role in shaping Dante's epic. Without a steady source of income, he had to be strategic about his work's appeal. This wasn't just a spiritual journey, it was a pitch to the powers that be, a literary plea for understanding, acceptance, and maybe a few coins tossed his way. The cost of a single manuscript in Dante's time could be equivalent to thousands of today's dollars, thanks to the labor-intensive process of hand-copying each word. Imagine the pressure of knowing that every stanza could make or break your next meal ticket. And then there's the myth of Dante's divine inspiration. While it's romantic to imagine him receiving poetic visions from on high, the reality was likely more mundane. Picture him hunched over a desk, ink-stained fingers tapping in frustration, as he tried to capture the ineffable beauty of paradise while wondering if he'd have enough funds to cover dinner. His divine muse was probably less a heavenly apparition and more a desperate need to make sense of a life turned upside down. But what about the themes of the Divine Comedy? That's where Dante truly shines. This wasn't just a tour of the afterlife, it was a scathing critique of contemporary society. The Inferno, for instance, isn't just a fiery pit. It's a who's who of Florentine politics, with Dante placing his enemies in various circles of hell as a form of poetic justice. It's the ultimate subtweet, medieval style. In contrast, Purgatorio offers a glimmer of hope, a place where souls can work off their sins and aspire to paradise. It's like a spiritual boot camp, where Dante's own struggles with exile and redemption are mirrored in the penitent souls he encounters. And finally, Paradiso, the celestial climax, where Dante envisions a perfect union with the divine, reflecting his own yearning for peace and understanding amidst life's chaos. Yet, as grand as these themes are, they're grounded in the nitty-gritty details of medieval life. His depiction of hell is filled with vivid, often grotesque imagery, a reflection of the harsh realities he faced. And while Dante's celestial visions are breathtaking, they were likely inspired by the starry skies he gazed at during long, lonely nights away from home. The creation of the Divine Comedies was a Herculean task, one that demanded not only literary genius but also sheer tenacity. Dante had to juggle his poetic ambitions with practical concerns, all while navigating the treacherous waters of exile. It's a testament to human resilience and creativity, a reminder that sometimes the most challenging circumstances can lead to the greatest works of art. So, as we leave Dante with quill in hand, poised between heaven and hell, remember that his journey is far from over. There's still more to unravel, more layers to peel back, as we continue to explore the life and legacy of a man who turned the chaos of his world into a timeless masterpiece. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. Now, as Dante sits there, quill poised between the eternal realms of heaven and hell, we find ourselves at the twilight of this epic tale. But before we wrap up, let's talk legacy. After all, what's a good story without pondering the aftermath, the impact, the what did we learn here, folks? Moment. Dante's Divine Comedy didn't just change literature, it was the tectonic shift that sent ripples through centuries of poetic and philosophical thought. And here's the kicker. The man himself never lived to see his magnum opus achieve the acclaim it enjoys today. Talk about a cosmic joke worthy of his own Inferno. Dante's influence on literature is as undeniable as gravity. His decision to write in the Tuscan dialect, pure genius. It catapulted the vernacular from the streets to the literary stratosphere, making it the linguistic bedrock that would eventually shape the Italian language. Imagine if Shakespeare had decided to write all his plays in his local pub's slang. That's the kind of impact we're talking about here. Dante's work wasn't just a poetry anthology, it was a cultural revolution wrapped in iambic pentameter. By elevating the vernacular, he democratized literature, giving voice to the masses. He transformed the local tongue into the lingua franca of art and intellect, a feat as audacious as it was brilliant. As for Florence, our dear city of political backstabbing and poetic exile, it eventually had a change of heart. But don't go thinking it was a quick apology note and a fruit basket. No, Florence took its sweet time, nearly 700 years to be precise. In 2008, the city council finally rescinded Dante's exile. That's right, folks. Dante was posthumously pardoned for a crime that could only be considered political oopsie in modern terms. Imagine being invited back to a party centuries after the guests have left and the cake has turned to dust. It's both flattering and utterly pointless, which is precisely what makes it so delightfully ironic. But what would Dante think of his modern-day cultural icon status? The man who spent his days in exile, scribbling by candlelight, might have had a few choice words for our contemporary obsession with celebrity. Would he be thrilled to see his face plastered on everything from coffee mugs to college dorm posters? Or would he roll his eyes at the kitschy commercialization of his genius? It's hard to say. On one hand, he'd probably appreciate the recognition that eluded him in life. On the other, he might find the whole affair a bit too much like being inducted into a cosmic hall of fame without the chance to give an acceptance speech. And speaking of irony, how about the fact that Dante's work, which was born out of personal and political turmoil, is now a staple of high school curricula worldwide? His Divine Comedy is dissected by students who, much like Dante himself, are probably more concerned with their own existential crises than the finer points of medieval allegory. Yet, there's something poetic about the idea that Dante's exploration of the human condition, its sins, its redemption, its eternal quest for meaning, continues to resonate across the ages. It's as if Dante himself has become a guide, leading us through the infernal chaos of adolescence to the paradisiacal promise of adulthood. Or so we hope. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. As much as we love the myth of Dante, the reality was far grittier. He was a man navigating a world that was as unforgiving as it was inspiring. His work was a product of its time, reflecting the social, political, and economic forces that shaped his life. Dante didn't just write about hell, he lived through his own version of it. His exile was a harsh reminder that even the most brilliant minds are subject to the whims of fate and fortune. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Dante's story is a testament to human resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, creativity can flourish. His legacy is not just in the words he wrote, but in the way he transformed the world through them. Dante's Divine Comedy is more than a literary masterpiece. It's a survival guide for the soul, a map through the chaos of existence, a beacon of hope in a world that often seems devoid of it. As we close the book on Dante Alighieri, let's remember the man behind the myth. He was a poet, a politician, a lover, and an exile. He was a dreamer with his head in the stars and his feet in the muck. And most importantly, he was a human being, grappling with the same questions that continue to haunt us today. What is the nature of good and evil? What does it mean to be redeemed? And perhaps most crucially, how do we find our place in a world that seems determined to cast us out? In the end, Dante's legacy is a reminder that the answers to these questions are as elusive as ever. But in seeking them, we find something far more valuable, the courage to keep searching, to keep striving, and to keep dreaming. And that, dear listeners, is a legacy worth celebrating. So as we bid farewell to Dante, let's raise a proverbial glass to his indomitable spirit, his enduring words, and his unyielding quest for truth in a world that often feels anything but. Here's to you, Dante Alighieri, the poet who dared to dream beyond the stars while firmly grounded in the reality of his own making. Cheers, and may your journey inspire ours for centuries to come. In the grand theatre of the Roman Empire, where emperors waged wars for glory and senators schemed over dinner, a peculiar kind of spectacle captivated the masses, gladiatorial combat. But let's rewind a bit, to a time before Rome was Rome, and these bloody games were less about entertainment and more about appeasing the gods. It seems the Etruscans, those mysterious neighbours of the early Romans, were the original instigators. They had a knack for turning funerals into a death match, literally. Imagine mourning Uncle Etruscus by watching two guys bash each other's brains in. It was believed these brutal brawls would honour the dead and secure them a smooth journey to the afterlife. Talk about a farewell party? As Rome began to blossom from a scrappy republic into the powerhouse of the Mediterranean, They cherry-picked this Etruscan tradition and, true to form, supercharged it. Initially, Roman aristocrats hosted gladiatorial games as a sort of elite party trick during funeral rites. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of hiring a band for your wedding, except with a bit more blood and gore. The first recorded Roman instance of such a spectacle dates back to 264 BCE, when the sons of Junius Brutus Pyrrha decided to honor their deceased father with 3 pairs of gladiators fighting it out in the Forum Boarium. That's 6 fighters, just enough to get the crowd buzzing without breaking the bank. As the Republic expanded, so did the need to keep the populace entertained and distracted. Into the era of state-sponsored games. By the time Julius Caesar was throwing his weight around, gladiatorial games had evolved from somber rites to all-out festivals. In 46 BCE, Caesar himself hosted a massive 320-pair extravaganza. Imagine the coordination nightmare of that event. It was less about honoring the dead and more about showcasing power and wealth, and Caesar was a master showman, a proto-producer of ancient reality TV. These games became the ultimate social event, a place where Rome's upper crust could rub elbows with the hoi polloi, all while feasting their eyes on the carnage. The Colosseum, that iconic symbol of Roman might, wasn't just a simple arena, it was a colossal statement of imperial grandeur. Opening in 80 CE under Emperor Titus, it could hold between 50,000 to 80,000 spectators, depending on whether you were counting standing room or not. That's like squashing a modern sports stadium crowd into one giant stone amphitheater. The Romans were nothing if not efficient. What drove this insatiable appetite for blood and spectacle? Part of it was political. Emperors and would-be emperors realized that the key to maintaining power was keeping the masses happy, or at least distracted. Panem et circenses, or bread and circuses, became the mantra of the ruling class. Free grain and free games were the pacifiers of the people, the ancient equivalent of Netflix and chill, only with a lot more risk and a lot less popcorn. Moreover, these games were a way for the elite to showcase their largesse and curry favor with the public. Hosting a successful set of games could boost one's political career, while skimping out could lead to public scorn. It was a high-stakes game of popularity, where the currency was human life, and success was measured by the crowd's roar. Yet, for all the grandeur, the reality was grim. Gladiators were often slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, fighting not for glory but survival. A few, like the famed Spartacus, managed to rise to celebrity status, but for most, it was a brutal, short-lived career. Training schools, or ludi, became the breeding ground for these fighters, where they were taught the art of combat by a lanista, the rather unsentimental version of a modern-day coach. The lanista's job was to ensure these men and sometimes women were ready to entertain and, if necessary, die spectacularly. It wasn't all just swords and shields. Some gladiators fought with nets and tridents, others with daggers and armor. The variety kept the audience guessing and the tension high. While we might romanticize the idea of gladiators as noble warriors, larger-than-life heroes battling against insurmountable odds, the truth was far more complex and darker. These games mirrored the violent undercurrent of Roman society, a place where life was cheap and the spectacle was king. Yet the allure of the games remains. They hold a mirror to the contradictions of Roman civilization, its grandeur and brutality, its love of order and chaos. In many ways, the gladiatorial games were the ultimate Roman paradox, celebrating human skill and bravery while simultaneously reveling in human suffering. And that's a history lesson that might just keep you on the edge of your seat, or perhaps help you drift off, pondering the curious ways of the ancient world. While the romantic allure of gladiators as noble warriors battling against insurmountable odds persists, the gritty reality was far more complex. So, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of gladiator life, starting with how these unfortunate souls ended up in the arena in the first place. Spoiler alert, it wasn't exactly a career choice. Recruitment for gladiatorial schools, or ludi, was less of a join the team and more of a you have no choice kind of deal. Most gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to fight. Imagine a job interview where the only qualification is unlucky enough to be caught. Yet, not all gladiators were forced into it. Some free men, known as auctorati, voluntarily signed up, lured by the prospect of fame, glory, or simply the chance to pay off debts. Talk about desperate measures. For these volunteers, the allure of the arena was like the ancient equivalent of a get-rich-quick scheme, only with a lot more bloodshed and a lot less chance of survival. Once recruited, these would-be warriors were shipped off to training schools. The most famous of these was the Ludus Magnus in Rome, conveniently located just a stone's throw from the Colosseum. Picture it as a cross between a boot camp and a death row, with the lanista, or head trainer, acting as both drill sergeant and prison warden. Training was rigorous and, let's be honest, downright brutal. Gladiators were taught how to fight with various weapons, each style ensuring that spectators got a diverse show. It wasn't just about hacking and slashing, it was about putting on a performance worthy of the grand stage. Now, let's address the economics of this bloody business. Training a gladiator was not cheap. According to historical sources, the cost of training a single gladiator could be equivalent to that of training an elite athlete today. We're talking thousands of sesterces, the ancient Roman currency, spent on food, weapons, and, of course, the occasional medical bill. Yes, gladiators had their own version of healthcare, albeit more patch 'em up and send 'em back in than comprehensive coverage. But why, you might ask, would anyone invest so much in what was essentially a human sacrifice waiting to happen? Simple gladiatorial games were immensely lucrative. Organizers of these events, often wealthy aristocrats or even the emperor himself, could rake in fortunes from the spectacle. Ticket sales, betting pools, and even merchandise. Yes, ancient Romans loved their souvenirs, made these games a financial goldmine. The more elaborate the spectacle, the higher the profits. It was a vicious economic cycle where human lives were the currency. Despite the glamorous sheen of the games, life as a gladiator was anything but. These men, and occasionally women, were housed in barracks more akin to prison cells than training facilities. Discipline was harsh, with strict rules governing every aspect of their lives. Breaking the rules? Well, let's just say the punishments were medieval before medieval was even a thing. The romantic image of gladiators as free-spirited warriors doesn't quite hold up when you consider their reality, constant surveillance, rigorous training regimes, and the ever-present spectre of death. While some gladiators did achieve a level of fame akin to modern sports stars, think Spartacus or the Thracian gladiator Flamma, who won 21 of 34 recorded battles, the average gladiator's career was short and brutal. Many didn't survive their first fight, and those who did often carried the scars, both physical and psychological, of their time in the arena. It's easy to get swept up in the drama and glamour of the gladiatorial games, but beneath the surface was a world of pain and exploitation. These games were a microcosm of Roman society itself, a complex blend of power, politics, and spectacle, all built on the backs of those who had no choice in the matter. And while we might admire the skill and bravery of these ancient fighters, it's worth remembering the heavy price they paid for our fascination. In the end, the gladiatorial games were not just entertainment, they were a reflection of the darker side of human nature, where life was a commodity and death a spectacle. So, next time you find yourself marveling at the grandeur of the Colosseum or the spectacle of the games, spare a thought for the men and women whose blood stained the sands of the arena. They were the unsung heroes of a brutal era, warriors by circumstance rather than choice, whose stories remind us of the fine line between heroism and tragedy. And as we continue to explore this fascinating chapter of history, let's not forget the lessons it holds about the cost of entertainment and the true nature of human spectacle. As we peel back the layers of this brutal sport, let's dive into the fascinating variety of gladiator classes, each with its own flair and deadly toolkit. You see, not all gladiators were created equal. The Romans, in their love for spectacle, categorized fighters into different classes, like a morbid fashion show where the latest trend was survival. Each type of gladiator came with its unique set of weapons and armor, designed not just for combat effectiveness, but also for maximum entertainment value. First up, the murmillo. Now, these guys were the heavyweights of the gladiatorial world. Named after a Greek fish, the murmillo was all about brute strength and resilience. Clad in a hefty helmet with a broad brim, they also sported a large rectangular shield, the scutum, and a gladius, a short sword perfect for close-quarters combat. The murmillo's armor was designed to withstand a battering, much like your favorite cast-iron skillet, but with a bit more flair. Their fights were often a test of endurance rather than agility, pitting them against lighter, more nimble opponents like the Thraex or the Hoplomachus. Speaking of the Thraex, these gladiators were like the Murmillo's feisty cousins. Inspired by Thracian warriors, they were armed with a small, round shield called a palma and a curved sword known as a sica. The Thrax's armour included distinctive high-leg greaves and a helmet with a griffin crest that would make even a Viking jealous. Their fighting style was all about quick movements and exploiting openings, a David and Goliath dynamic that kept the crowd on the edge of their seats. In the narrative of the games, the Thrax represented the cunning and agility of a nimble underdog, a role that resonated with the masses who cheered from the stands. Now, let's not forget the Retiarius, the rock stars of the arena, known for their flashy style and unique weapons. Imagine a gladiator armed with a trident, a net, and a dagger, tools more suited to a fisherman than a fighter. This class was practically a performance piece, with the Retiarius using the net to ensnare their opponent before moving in for the kill with the trident. They wore minimal armor, usually just a shoulder guard called a gallerus, which made them highly vulnerable but also incredibly agile. The Retiarius represented the ultimate gamble, embodying the tension between risk and reward. Their fights were dramatic spectacles, evoking a visceral thrill as they danced away from danger, only to strike with precision. But let's take a pause here and address some myths about gladiatorial combat. Hollywood would have you believe it was all about bloodbaths and instant death, but in reality, these matches were more like an ancient game of chess with weapons. Gladiators were expensive investments, remember? Organizers didn't want their prized fighters dying too soon. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of managing a high-stakes sports team. Many fights ended with a draw or a nod to the crowd rather than a killing blow. Yes, death happened, but it wasn't as common as you might think. The drama was in the tension, the near misses, and the skillful exchanges. Beyond the blood and sand, each gladiator class carried cultural symbolism that resonated with Roman society. The Murmillo, with its Roman-inspired gear, symbolized the strength and power of the empire, solid, dependable, and a bit heavy-handed. Meanwhile, the Thraex, with its exotic Thracian origins, appealed to Rome's fascination with foreign lands and peoples, embodying the empire's reach and diversity. And the Retiarius? They were the embodiment of the clever, the unexpected, the underdog who could topple giants with nothing but a net and a sharp wit. The games were more than just fights. They were stories told in steel and sweat, reflecting the complex narrative of Rome itself. Each clash in the arena was a microcosm of the empire's values and contradictions, a celebration of martial prowess and a reminder of mortality's ever-present shadow. In this deadly theatre, the stakes were as high as the expectations of the roaring crowds. The Colosseum was not just a venue but a stage where human drama unfolded with gladiators as the unwilling stars. These fighters, despite being thrust into the limelight by circumstance, became symbols of resilience and defiance. Their battles were a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure even when faced with the spectre of death. So, as we stand amidst the echoes of clashing swords and cheering crowds, we are reminded that the gladiatorial games were as much about the stories told as they were about the spectacle. They were a reflection of an empire at its peak, a society grappling with its power and its excesses. And in this grand narrative, the gladiators were the heroes and martyrs, their stories woven into the very fabric of Roman history. As we continue our journey through this fascinating world, keep in mind that the sands of the arena were more than just a battleground. They were a canvas for the epic tales that shaped a civilization. And with that, we'll leave the gates of the Colosseum ajar, ready to delve deeper into the lives, the legends, and the lasting legacy of Rome's most famous warriors. Stay tuned, because the saga of the gladiators is far from over. As we linger on the edge of this grand narrative, the Colosseum looms large, a stone colossus in the heart of Rome, standing as a testament to the empire's flair for both spectacle and control. But let's peel back the marble curtain and peer into the political theatre that played out alongside the blood and sand. Because, believe it or not, these gladiatorial games were as much about backroom deals and public perception as they were about swords and shields. First, let's talk about the emperors. These guys were the ultimate showmen, the Steven Spielbergs of the amphitheatre circuit. They knew that to keep the Roman populace from grumbling too much about taxes or the lack of running water, They had to keep them entertained, and nothing did the trick quite like a good gladiatorial game. After all, nothing says, "I'm in charge," like throwing the biggest party in town, complete with lions and tigers, and well, maybe not bears, but you get the idea. Take Emperor Augustus, for instance. This guy wasn't just content with reshaping Rome's political landscape, he wanted to reshape its social calendar too. Augustus hosted not one, not two, but 44 games during his reign, drawing in crowds like an ancient rock concert. And the cost? Well, let's just say he could have bought a few islands in the Aegean Sea with the coin he spent on these spectacles. But for Augustus, it was a worthwhile investment. Each game was a chance to reinforce his image as a benevolent ruler, a provider of joy and distraction in equal measure. But Augustus wasn't alone in this arena of political showmanship. Fast forward to Emperor Trajan, who took the concept of go big or go home to new heights. To celebrate his victory over the Dacians, Trajan threw a 103-day bash that featured 10,000 gladiators and the slaughter of 11,000 animals. Talk about an all-you-can-watch buffet of violence. The message was clear: Rome was unstoppable, and Trajan was the man making it all happen. It was less about the actual bloodshed and more about the spectacle of empire. An elaborate propaganda machine where the price of admission was nothing compared to the political capital gained. And who could forget Emperor Commodus? This guy took things a step further, deciding that the best way to connect with the people was to step into the arena himself. Sure, he might have had a few rigged fights to ensure he came out on top, but hey, it's the thought that counts, right? Commodus was the ultimate PR stunt gone wild, a ruler who blurred the lines between emperor and entertainer. But it wasn't just the emperors who cashed in on the gladiatorial games. Wealthy sponsors, or editors as they were called, also played a crucial role. These were the movers and shakers of Roman society, eager to boost their social standing by hosting games that would endear them to the masses. Think of it like running for public office, but instead of campaign rallies, you threw a bash with spears and lions. These events were prime opportunities to showcase wealth and curry favour, essential tools in a society where public opinion could make or break a career faster than you could say veni, vidi, viti. Let's not forget the venues themselves. The Colosseum, with its towering arches and labyrinthine corridors, was more than an architectural marvel. It was a stage for power plays. Built under Emperor Vespasian and completed by his son Titus, this colossal amphitheatre could accommodate up to 80,000 spectators. It was a physical manifestation of Rome's might and a reminder of the emperor's ability to command resources and labour on an unprecedented scale. The games held there were free to the public, a calculated move to ensure that everyone, from the patricians in their togas to the plebeians in their tunics, could partake in the imperial largesse. But as much as these games were about projecting power, they also laid bare the class divisions of Roman society. The seating arrangement alone was a lesson in social hierarchy. The best seats, closest to the action, were reserved for the elite senators, equestrians, and other VIPs, while the hoi polloi were left to scramble for spots higher up. It was like the ancient version of a VIP box at a concert, complete with a perfect view and a reminder of who really ran the show. And what about the impact on Roman society at large? Well, the games served as a pressure valve, a way to channel the public's aggression and discontent into something that was, ironically, outside the political arena. By providing a controlled environment for violence, the games helped maintain social order. It was a way to let off steam, a communal experience that united people in their love of spectacle and their shared Roman identity. But let's not romanticize it too much. For all the talk of unity and identity, the games were also a brutal reminder of the value Rome placed on human life, or lack thereof. Gladiators, often slaves or prisoners of war, were the expendable pawns in this grand spectacle, their lives forfeited for the entertainment of the masses. Yet the allure of their battles, the drama of life and death played out before a captive audience, continues to captivate us today. So, as we unravel the threads of this ancient spectacle, we see a complex tapestry of power and politics, spectacle and social control. The gladiatorial games were more than just entertainment. They were a mirror reflecting the ambitions and excesses of the Roman Empire. And as the echoes of the past continue to resonate, we are left to ponder the lessons these ancient spectacles hold for us today. After all, history might not repeat itself, but it sure does love a good sequel. Stay tuned, because the next act in this epic saga is just around the corner. But, like any blockbuster franchise, even the gladiatorial games had to face their inevitable decline. As the pages of history turned, the spectacle that once held Rome in thrall began to lose its sheen. The decline of gladiatorial combat was a slow burn rather than a sudden collapse, influenced by a confluence of economic strains, shifting political landscapes, and evolving cultural tastes. Let's dig into why the blood-soaked sands of the arena eventually dried up. Economically speaking, the games were a massive drain on resources. Imagine throwing a party so extravagant that it made even the most lavish of weddings look like a potluck dinner. By the 3rd century CE, the Roman Empire was starting to feel the pinch. The sprawling empire was expensive to maintain, with borders to defend and a bureaucracy to feed. The cost of funding these grand spectacles, where hundreds of gladiators might fight alongside exotic beasts shipped from far-flung corners of the empire, became less justifiable as the state coffers thinned. When the choice came down to feeding the army or entertaining the masses, well, even the most enthusiastic emperor knew which side his bread was buttered on. Politically, the games began to lose their punch. The initial allure of the games as a tool for emperors to curry favor with the public started to wane. Roman citizens were becoming increasingly disillusioned with the endless cycle of rulers who came and went, often violently. As the empire's glory days dimmed, the populace hungered for more substantial reforms than a day at the amphitheatre could provide. The bloody spectacles, once a symbol of Rome's might, started to feel like an echo of a bygone era, a relic from a time when the empire had the luxury to indulge in such excesses. Culturally, the winds were changing too. By the end of the 4th century, Christianity had taken root across the empire, and with it came a moral reckoning. The new religion, which preached compassion and the sanctity of life, cast gladiatorial combat in a harsh light. It's hard to reconcile love thy neighbour with watch thy neighbour get mauled by a lion. In 325 CE, Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor, began to distance his regime from these bloody entertainments. Although he didn't immediately ban them, he set the stage for their eventual decline. By 404 CE, under the influence of Christian leaders who saw the games as a barbaric throwback, Emperor Honorius finally put an end to gladiatorial combat. It took a monk named Telemachus, who dramatically interrupted a gladiatorial contest only to be stoned to death by the enraged crowd to drive the point home. His martyrdom marked the end of the games in the West, a testament to how deeply the spectacle was ingrained in the Roman psyche, yet also a signal of changing times. So, why do the stories of these ancient fighters still resonate with us today? Part of it is the timeless allure of the underdog story. Gladiators, often marginalized individuals thrust into the spotlight, personify resilience and defiance against overwhelming odds. They were the ultimate survivors, embodying a narrative arc that appeals to our sense of drama and justice. Moreover, who doesn't love a good redemption story? Many gladiators, despite their grim circumstances, achieved a kind of immortality through their bravery, becoming symbols of hope and resistance. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The reality was that for every Spartacus, whose rebellion against the Roman state became the stuff of legend, there were countless others whose names and stories were lost to history, their lives snuffed out in the pursuit of entertainment. The myth of the noble gladiator is a seductive one, but it glosses over the harsh realities of a system that commodified human life. These fighters were often prisoners of war, slaves or criminals, forced into a brutal existence with limited choices. Their valor in the arena was as much a product of necessity as it was of bravery. Yet the myth endures. Hollywood has certainly played its part, with films like Gladiator capturing the imagination of modern audiences. These dramatizations, while often historically inaccurate, tap into a deeper narrative of honor, sacrifice, and courage that transcends time. The Colosseum, now a ruin standing against the backdrop of modern Rome, continues to draw millions of visitors every year, a testament to the enduring fascination with these ancient warriors and their bloody theatre. In the end, the story of Gladiators offers us a mirror to the complexities of human nature. It reveals our capacity for both brutality and compassion, our fascination with spectacle, and our desire to see the downtrodden rise above their circumstances. The legacy of the gladiators is not just about the battles fought in the arena, but also about the stories they left behind, stories that challenge us to reflect on our own values and the cost of our entertainment. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's carry forward the lessons it imparts. The gladiatorial games remind us of the thin line between civilization and savagery, the power of spectacle to both unite and divide, and the enduring human spirit that can find dignity even amidst the darkest of circumstances. So, next time you find yourself marveling at tales of ancient Rome, remember the gladiators, those reluctant heroes of the arena whose legacy continues to echo through the ages, challenging us to question our own narratives and the stories we choose to tell.